Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and this is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them. First, his ability to speak does not make him intelligent. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
At last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi. At last we will have revenge. It's going well, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing great now. That was a really good Darth Maul. And why do I get the feeling we've picked up another pathetic life form? It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
Maybe we sus being friends.
I did not have a Boss Nass quote on my bingo card. That is for sure. That was incredible.
Greg, I had that in my top three. I almost took it. I'm glad I left it. I thought I was leaving you an Obi-Wan quote, but I'm even more happy.
Yeah,
that's you committed more to the role than I would have.
So, it was really good. Yeah, I can see the spit on your screen. It's like it's great. All right, so May the 4th be with you, everyone. We're recording this on Monday, but we're just coming fresh off a fantastic Star Wars, day, weekend, month. Like, it really depends on who you ask now. I feel like I've seen all three of those monikers being used. For us, Star Wars is an everyday celebration, but this is the one time of year where our fandom is like validated by the rest of society. So, this year for Star Wars Day, May the 4th, it was marking a very special anniversary of the 1999 prequel film, The Phantom Menace. This was the 25th anniversary. And so because of that, in honor of the anniversary, the film is back in theaters. Over the weekend, we all made at least one trip. We'll hear about how many trips there actually were or are going to be to the theater. And so we're here to kind of, look back on our relationship with the film and thoughts on the film then and now. So it's sort of like a retrospective to celebrate Star Wars Day and this anniversary. So I will say that today's conversation is going to be filled with spoilers from the get-go. So if you don't want this quarter-century-old movie spoiled for you somehow, go see it in theaters this week or watch it at home on Disney+. It's very accessible. And rejoin us when you're ready to listen to our conversation. So, PT, before we get into it, if listeners think we must be virgins in the Force after listening to this episode, what can they do?
A communication disruption can mean only one thing. You didn't subscribe to the podcast. Wherever you get your shows, please subscribe, give us a like, give us a rating, a review. We host the feed on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. But you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, wherever. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review or on Letterboxd at LTR Pod. Jen?
Amazing. And I just want to say as a side comment, we're really hitting our stride with these like referential bits in the intro. I just want to put that out there. Good work.
I mean, this is one of the peak ones where there's so much to choose from. It's just a lot of fertile ground.
Yeah.
Very, very true. Very true. So first I wanted to start by looking back and going down memory lane, right? Last year when Return of the Jedi came out in theaters for its anniversary, a lot of us were too young to have really had a theatrical memory of it, but this is not true for this film. So take us back to 1999. What was it like seeing it back then? What did it mean to you? PT, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, I will start with the trailer, which I know a lot of people have already had that discussion in other forms. I just heard Greg on Project Stardust discuss that he had the VHS of it. I did go to see The Waterboy, the Adam Sandler movie Waterboy, because there was, I don't know if this was widespread. You two can set me straight on this. This one theater in Philadelphia made it seem like they were unique in doing this, but maybe they weren't. But they announced that they were for the movies where the Phantom Menace trailer was attached, which I don't know if we knew it was called the Phantom Menace. I think it might have just been episode 1. But the movies where the trailer would be attached, they announced they were going to show it after the movie as well as before the movie. So it was the Waterboy's 80 7 minutes, and Meet Joe Black was like 160. So easy choice. A bunch of my college friends and I piled into a car, went to see it, lost our minds, talked about like jerks, talked about it during the first 20 minutes of The Waterboy. And then to see the actual movie, it wasn't like the full Man's Chinese Theater like 2-month camp out. It was getting back to Massachusetts from college in early May, and 2.5 weeks before May. Was it May 19th was when this one came out, I believe.
I think that's right.
So like 2.5 weeks before, they were like, well, tickets are going on sale at the Showcase Cinemas in Revere. There was a line, but it was like, we waited for like 45 minutes. And I think I bought like 12 tickets. There was a whole crew of us that went. We went to the theater at about 8:15 for the midnight showing. We played the arcade games for a little while. When they opened, they let us into the theater at 9. And we got center because no assigned seats. And some of us sat there for 3 hours. A handful of us left and theater hopped in to see Jet Li's The One. And they saw the entire movie and then came back, and the rest of us were still waiting. And then the theater was packed at midnight. The movie rolled. When it was over, I hugged one of my friends because we had seen a new Star Wars movie. We had a great time. And then, we were just out in the parking lot for we went to a different location to not be in the movie theater parking lot because they were showing it all night. And we were respectful of others, but we went to I think it was a Friendly's parking lot, and parked and just talked for an hour. And at the time, we all loved it. The backlash began later, but in the moment, we didn't care about the rougher parts. We were just like, that was incredible, and we can't believe there's a fourth Star Wars movie. Greg, how about you?
Well, first of all, RIP to Showcase Cinema's Revere location. I believe it's now an Amazon distribution warehouse. Unfortunately,
do they still have the flea market though? Is the flea market still on Saturdays?
Only online on Amazon.com. No, yeah. I don't think so. So just for context, I was 16, and that sounds like too old for the Phantom Menace, but a very nerdy, lonely 16. So I would say, really, really excited for this film, and it hit me very well in general. So as I recall, so I was in New Hampshire, and we had a movie theater about a half hour from our house. And I remember being in school that morning and kind of going through my normal high school day. And at some point in our band class, it came up, and the director pulled out of his wallet that he already had his 2 tickets for that night purchased in advance. And it blew our little minds. We're like, you can get them in advance, which sounds so crazy in this day and age of pre-selecting seats and never actually touching a paper ticket and all that.
I was going to say, this is your villain origin story where you learned that you could buy movie tickets beforehand.
Well, and so then I went home, and my sister is 4 years older than me, and she was fresh home from would have been her sophomore year of college, I think. And so I cajoled her in every possible way, and she was like, fine, nerd, and took me to the movie theater. And we got there when the doors opened for the day, which was 4, and got our tickets for the 7 or 7:30 showing. And so in the end, I ended up sitting between my sister and the high school band director. So I showed him that I was there. And so it is kind of a blur, even though you would think I'd have strong memories. But I do remember, especially when that, and I still to this day, when there's a new Star Wars movie, when that opening fanfare hits and you see the kind of first words come up and it says episode, in this case 1, you're just like, yes, it's possible. We can see other numbers there. It's shocking. And I was totally locked in the movie, especially the first half hour. I thought was phenomenal. And then I think, as much as I love this movie, the middle drags a bit. And I'm not saying I was young and cynical and was like, not for me, but I remember feeling like, okay, let's get back to some of that. And then definitely the finale just blew my mind. Like, it was so awesome to see the kind of 4-part battle structure, and especially the duel of the fates. I did say this on podcast Stardust, but I do remember my high school band director at the when the parade is happening, and Jar Jar kind of trips on the stirrup of his Kadu, I believe, or maybe he's riding a Famba. He kind of trips and he says something dorky, and I just remember my band director kind of going like, ugh, things are getting pretty old. And then so I saw the start of the Jar Jar Gungan backlash there in my theater beside me. But I loved it, and I continue to see it all summer. I think I saw it 12 times total into the fall. Before the VHS came out, it then played at my sister's college. So one of the first times I did like a long drive on my own was to go to her college and see it, in the kind of crummy conference room movie theater they had in the student union at UNH, and watch it 2 or 3 times over a weekend with her there. So yeah, and it still is like a really wonderful nostalgic period in my life, and it certainly was when my sibling and I were more close than we are now, and so it's fun looking back on it. I don't think it took too long till my friend group started to really turn on it and made me feel a little bad for how much I loved it, but I still have bounced back from that clearly today. Now, Jen, we're roughly the same age. So were you on the right side of the not too cynical, or were you on the wrong side of the too cynical line?
I was on the right side. So I was 15, because I believe your birthday is in March and mine's in June. So when I saw this, I was still 15. And this movie really, so I loved Star Wars before this movie came out, from watching the VHS tapes. Like, it was, so I was already in, but this movie coming out really leveled up my fandom to like a lifestyle. You know what I mean? Like there was something that happened when this movie came out that then became like that. Then it was like a whole other thing. And I think the reason because of that is my birthday is in June. And so I saw this movie, and then everybody gave me merch for my birthday. So I had hats, I had shirts, I had the most memorable thing was and I cannot remember who bought this for me, but someone gave me a Jar Jar Binks inflatable chair that, as I was telling PT when we were seeing it in theaters on Friday, my cousin violently stabbed and deflated out of anger, spite, I don't know, there was like
on the orders of Boss Nass.
Right, exactly. He was actually like an assassin sent to kill him. But yeah, he was being punished. And like and so yeah, so it's like the way that I think about Star Wars now, and the way I engage with it, not just as like a movie fan, but as like someone who buys all the stuff and who like goes to all the things, you know what I mean? That's really where it started. And I remember, yeah, like 15-year-old me did not care at all about any criticisms. And like I was too young probably to realize that like being critical of movies was a thing at all. I was just so happy to be there, and so happy that I got to see this movie. I was like, I could watch lightsaber fights all day. My AOL Instant Messenger handle was Qui-Gon Jen. Like that's where that all started. So yeah, this was a huge movie, very formative in my like film fandom experience and in sort of my Star Wars fandom experience.
Speaking of the lifestyle switch, and also kind of related to the fate of Showcase Cinemas, I believe at this point in my life, I'm older than the two of you. So I was finishing my junior year. I'm actually also older than Greg's sibling. I was 20 and I just finished my junior year. I should have been way more cynical about it than I was. But like, I think me and my college friends and my high school friends who I remained close with, I think most of us were starting that sort of switch to just like, but what if we just liked it? Like, what if we just had fun? But the lifestyle thing I meant to discuss is I think I had ordered things from Amazon before. I might have ordered books, but the first thing I know for sure I remember ordering from etoys.com was the first wave of Phantom Menace toys. So I
Nice.
didn't go to like the midnight launch because I had gone on the computer in my parents' den and ordered all of the toys, and they arrived like 2 days afterwards. And I was like, this is incredible. And I just like opened all those toys. And I was like, this is not going to be a problem later in my life. This is totally fine. I can control this. And
Hope this
yeah,
doesn't awaken anything in me. Yeah.
exactly.
But that's the other thing too. We got to mention, merchandising it from like in terms of products and stuff like that. I had all the Pepsi cans. For some reason, I'm the only one who had to throw them away because the Pepsi coagulated and seeped through the can, and ruined my bookshelf. Like it's still upsetting. Apparently, John's parents still in their like refrigerator, because they have like a spare refrigerator just for drinks and stuff like that in their house. They still have the golden Yoda can unopened,
Wow.
just like sitting in their refrigerator. Like, I could not achieve that dream. And then like, I posted about this on Instagram, but like my college dorm room, the poster that came with me every year I moved to a different dorm room was my Phantom Menace poster. It was like the thing that
Nice.
I wanted people to know that I really like this movie. So yeah.
And
So I think,
that Drew Struzan poster is a classic, right? Like that episode 1 poster, and he did all 3 for the prequels, but it's so iconic and wonderful. And I really like the new poster that's out for the re-release, but it's like you can't top that original.
I agree. And I'm really mad that like I wasn't smart enough. College me wasn't smart enough to use a frame, because after like taking it down and putting it back up like 4 or 5 times, it was too ratty to actually like keep at the end. And so I don't have it anymore, which makes me super sad. But yeah. So for listeners, just know that we're coming at this with a strong nostalgia tie to this movie, right? And we probably will be making fun of it and be a little critical of it because we are now movie critics, right? But just know that comes for people who are fans of the movie, know that comes from a place of love. And for those who are maybe, I don't know why you're listening to this, I guess, if you're not a fan of this movie. So maybe I shouldn't bother addressing those folks. But just know that if you're like, why are they being so positive about this movie? I don't really like that. That's part of it is sort of how and when we saw this movie, and how much of Star Wars fans we are, obviously. So I was trying to think of what our unique lens could be kind of to talk about this movie, because there are so many, really great podcasts, Star Wars podcasts, movie podcasts, who are covering this anniversary release. And I was like, well, what can we bring to the discussion that maybe other people wouldn't be focusing on specifically? And so I wanted to start with just talking about the legacy that this film has on the history of cinema and filmmaking, right? We can obviously talk about the impact it has had on Star Wars specifically, but where do we see the influence of this movie on either like science fiction films as a genre, franchise filmmaking? Because I feel like I was trying to look up quickly before this, like what prequels existed before this movie. Like, did prequels become a thing that we now have a lot, like a go-to thing for movie franchises because of this movie? Trilogies, blockbusters, there's so many different ways in which this movie could have had impact on the future. So what do we think?
I mean, I will say, to start off, I think the first major impact is just the technical advances that happened because George Lucas was like, I want to go back and try to tell these stories. And the maybe apocryphal or just overly simplistic version of the story is he saw what ILM could do with the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park and was like, okay, I'm going to try to come up with these stories now. But, just pushing the boundaries on that, having the company so he could use them at a pretty steep discount, and say, like, you're being willing to be like, yeah, maybe it won't work, but try it and see where it goes. And so, I think, this will be not the last time something like this is said, but there were a lot of grumblings and complaints and backlash about the CGI, about the approach to filmmaking that he took on this. But I think that there are a lot of accomplishments that people almost universally love. Like Gollum doesn't exist without Jar Jar, and as well as so many other approaches to filmmaking and digital technology and computer technology that only exist because of this movie and because of the success that it had. At least commercially, if again, there are some who don't think it succeeded so cinematically.
I think that has to be number one on the list. I do think, that it is also, just to really film nerd out, like we have to remember they don't start shooting totally digital until episode 2, which is like also part of that legacy, right? Like that's what really, I think, breaks open the whole make whatever you want appear on screen, and they can do whatever they can. One of the things I did to get ready for this weekend is I rewatched The Beginning, which is it's a documentary on the episode 1 DVD. It has not made its way onto Disney Plus, and it is not on the Blu-ray set. I had to actually go diving for my DVD to dig it out. And it's really great as a reminder of where they were at. And there's this iconic scene that and I think the whole documentary is also on YouTube. My buddy Carl was like, "Hey, dummy, it's on YouTube, like any normal person would look for it." I was like, "Oh no, I had to dig in my basement for it." He was much kinder than that, but that was essentially the message. And so there's this iconic scene where it's like the first big conference. So the whole film has been storyboarded, and George steps up with 3 highlighters in his hand, and each storyboarded image, he does a little I think it's yellow for what's real and they will shoot, and then like pink for what is going to be digitally inserted. And it's really fun to watch because you see John Knoll there, the head of visual effects, just this wonderkind who invented Photoshop in his garage. And he's just, as it goes on, he's getting more and more scared of how much is going. And, they highlight Jar Jar, and then he's like, that's just something that's never been done before, but we're going to do it. And it is kind of jaw dropping. I think it's true. I leaned over and said this to Carl in the theater yesterday. I think the only shot in the film that does not have any visual effects is when the gas comes out of the vent in the first conference room. There's an insert shot, and that was done on set in camera. I think everything else in the film has something added to it, or a light change or something like that, which is just incredible to think about in 1999. And, I will also say, and this is verging on our next topic a little bit, I think it actually still looks pretty good. Not flawless. You can tell Jar Jar is not really there in a lot of scenes today. CG has advanced, but it looks far superior than some movies I saw last year that had kind of a poor effects budget. So I think it does look pretty good. And that's a huge technical achievement. So I'm just going to piggyback on PT with that one. Jen, do you want to say anything about that before we expand the list?
Yeah, no, just that I feel like over the years I've read lots of interviews and the common theme from George Lucas is like, well, when I made the original trilogy, I felt limited. My imagination was curbed by the technology and the practical effects, right? And so I remember him really talking about how this was his chance to have a complete palette. You know what I mean? Like to be able to make happen what was in his head. And that's a very powerful idea for an artist, right? Like in general. And I feel like that idea really has kind of like we almost take for granted now in movies, right? That it's like because I think CG has such a negative connotation now where it's like, oh, like it's a cheat or like laziness or something like that, right? I feel like when people talk about it, visual effects that lean heavily on CG, that's sort of the way that they talk about it. But, it was nice to hear I remember it's nice to remember the sort of more like hopeful and idealistic version of that, right? To be like, well, we can imagine anything. I think people have lost that sort of spark of like, wow, isn't it cool that in a movie you could see this because of CG visual effects. And I will agree that like, and yeah, again, this is spoiling. Maybe we should just save it for when we talk about when we saw it again. Because I think the thing I was about to say probably stepping on that a little bit. But yeah, so I'll take us, a little bit in a different direction with this question of, because to me, the most interesting thing while I was watching this time was thinking about how this really impacted franchise filmmaking in particular. And because I was trying to think in the timeline of movies, it's probably not totally accurate in my head. But to me, I'm like, wait, 1999, those X-Men movies don't come out until the early 2000s, right? Like, I don't remember when the first one is.
It's
And I'm like,
2000, I think.
okay. So it's like really shortly after this, but I'm like, this was sort of the beginning of something that is almost at the end now, in terms of like, I'm thinking about like the sort of genre, sort of hero franchise, like, so I kept kind of wondering, like, did the Phantom Menace sort of pave the way, or was the catalyst for, and made sort of like the MCU possible, right? And I think the idea of like telling a larger story that connects with something that came before, so it's not just an individual trilogy, but is this whole like universe that you play around with through multiple films. Like, is this where that all started? And I feel like that's really interesting. Historically, it's an interesting thing to think about.
I agree. I also feel like I was trying to look around a little bit too, and I was like, there had been times when, another movie came out and it was technically set before the first one. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is the one that like is sort of always I always think of, but I didn't know if there was a time when so much, like a whole generation had passed, like 17 years had gone by since a movie had come out, and it was, was this the beginning of sort of what has become mining the legacy IP of, don't people remember this? Like, let's pull this back into pop culture. And obviously, like, that sounds so cynical, whereas this was like always sort of presented as, well, here are 3 stories that are in the middle of longer stories. And George was always talking about, I'm going to make 12. Okay, I'm going to make 9. Okay, I'm never making any more. All right, maybe I'll do the first 3. And so it was always, and it's the same, the same creative force, so to speak, behind this movie as was behind the first 3. But like, besides, the big sort of Superman and Batman movies that like didn't really reboot, they just took a little while to make sequels, Superman in the 70s and 80s, and then Batman late 80s through the 90s, and then James Bond, which just sort of kept going and had a slightly slightly more downtime in between some of the Bonds. I couldn't really think of something where it was dormant for this long and then it came back and was such a huge deal, and was also, actually, this is set before. And the fact that, I don't know about you all, but I still think of this movie as episode 1, not as the Phantom Menace. So I think that it was so like ingrained in everybody that like, okay, this is the like early one. This is set.
Right. This is where the story starts, kind of.
Right. And the marketing was great on that. The every saga has a beginning tagline, I think, really got, connected with people. So I think there's sort of a line to both sort of the IP resurrections, as well as the long cinematic universe franchise building you're talking about, Jen. I also feel like there's a line from this to the Lucasfilm maybe miscalculation of like, the audience is going to be able to figure this out, that like, we're going to do a movie that's set after Return of the Jedi, then one set before the original Star Wars movie, then another later one, and then one set between episode 3 and episode 4, and that like everyone would follow along with that and not get confused. So yeah, I think it did, like the first Star Wars movie, set off a lot of dominoes of blockbuster filmmaking that maybe it didn't mean to, and maybe it created a bunch of problems, but opened a bunch of doors to what could be done, both for good and for ill.
And it's really interesting that we're talking about this movie in the year, because we just came from our movie hype draft where we were sort of like, all of these movies are sequels or prequels, right? And so to think that that's all we're getting this summer, right? Whereas back when the Phantom Menace came out, it was maybe the only one of its kind or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's really interesting, historical spectrum. The other thing I'll point out too is like, what I really noticed when I was watching this time around was those key moments where they're like, see, this is a thing you knew already, right? And it's so interesting because it's like done so explicitly in a way that I feel like wouldn't be done that way now, right? The idea where Captain Panaka's like R2D2, ma'am. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like a very pointed moment to be like, get ready for it. Oh, here he is. It's R2D2, right? In a way that would sort of be seen as like kind of crass sort of now, or like the expectation is that you do that a lot more fluidly, whereas back then that wasn't like we didn't have any expectations about that sort of moment in a movie, right?
Maybe this is
You don't
being a
think
few
so?
years older, but people thought it was crass then too. People were like,
Okay.
this is so dumb. This is very cheesy. That was one of many things on the list of grievances that were aired for this
Okay.
movie.
Yeah,
But
15-year-old
yes.
me was just like, I know R2D2, like it was pure joy. Yeah,
Well, and
so
I just want to pick up on that IP point because I do think it is unique, and I liked the way PT formulated it there. That like, oops, the original Star Wars accidentally starts 30 years of terrible blockbusters filmmaking, and oops, we start IP brand extension, and then Force Awakens starts the Lego sequel, which becomes the new kind of updated version of that, where it's specifically let's bring back a really old character to come mentor a new generation in some way, and it is kind of this dark side to the Star Wars legacy in some ways within that. I think it also besides jumpstarting Star Wars and prequel telling, it does really expand, I think, what other creators get inspired to do, for better and ill, right? I mean, I do think that the way George Lucas demonstrated you could really do anything in print and on film and in your visual effects did have a really overwhelmingly positive effect, but there is a period of like 10 years after that where you get these big swings to start big new franchises in these environments that don't look right and don't work. So we're not seeing 10 John Carters this summer or something like that, or well, even I would even go so far, I just listened to the 1999 movie draft from Ringerverse, which is fantastic and is a good reminder that this is before the IP wave. But you get something like Lord of the Rings, which is on the positive side, but then you get like the Matrix sequels on the other side, and things like that, which you see the kind of world building go the wrong way, which is that there needs to be something more at the core of it than just, I have a really cool idea for what this planet would look like. And so many of those have come and gone in that span, in these 25 years since the Phantom Menace. And yet Star Wars is the one that's still kind of dominating. I think any other franchise wants to be Star Wars even today, despite some struggles of late.
you're conveniently forgetting the Hobbit movies, because I feel like that's where the Lord of
what?
the Rings as a franchise.
Oh, are they
The
going to
Hobbit
make
movies.
those? They're going to make those? That's so exciting. Oh, I
Guillermo
can't
del
wait.
Toro? I'm so excited.
That can't possibly go wrong.
Oh, but you know what I mean, because I feel like those Hobbit movies got made the way they did because there was pressure to be like, well, we can't just have one movie that's the Hobbit. We need to have three, right? Like it's like, I don't know. So I'm not blaming this movie on that necessarily. I'm just saying it's part of the larger sort of push that this movie was a part of. But
I'm just going to say, as we move into thinking about, talking about now and how seeing the re-release was, we were not properly in the 1999 mindset, because Greg was talking about all the mistakes, the accidental mistakes of effects caused by the Star Wars movies. And for the Phantom Menace in 1999, he didn't say, oops, I did it again. Which was just right there. It was waiting.
Oh. Okay. So
let's talk about the re-release.
I think that's yeah. So I think let's talk about seeing this movie today in 2024. What was it like watching it this time around? Now, Greg, I think you've seen it the most times in theaters out of all of us so far, and probably will have the final tally being the winner at the end of the week. But what was your experience kind of like watching this in the theaters now?
So yes. So I had been planning this for a long time. So we're at the end of the academic year, so my schedule is pretty empty. And I was planning to do 3 in a row on Friday, but then I had a commitment I had to drive up to New Hampshire for, and so I only got to see it twice on Friday. So I did the 4 o'clock and the 7:30, and then on Saturday afternoon I took all my whole core family. So my 2 kids who are ages 9 and 4, and my long-suffering wife who was like, yeah, I definitely want to see Phantom Menace again. I support you. And then on Sunday, a podcast here in Boston called HoloNet Marauders had put together, they rented out a theater and got 30 of us all together to sit and watch it together. And I am going 2 more times, but that's it. So I will see it 6 total times
Wait, so
this
okay,
release.
because you wouldn't
Unless
tell us the
something
number
goes wrong.
earlier because you wanted to save it.
No. So 4 so far, and have tickets for 2 more as well. And I have had just the absolute best time with this. I will say I did really enjoy seeing it with a theater full of fans, but I will say the 7:00 Friday screening I went to was probably the best crowd, and it was just people there to have a really good time. And the moment that has become a litmus test this weekend is when the 2 Jedi step into the conference room and throw back their hoods. If there are some woos, I know I'm in for a good time. If it's silent, it's like, okay, this is a kind of serious crowd. But the crowd cheered at like the silliest, randomest stuff, but everybody was there for a good time. It was a lot of families across all my screenings. Friday at 4 was a little empty, but I had one woman who I'm guessing here, but looked probably about 20 years older than me, come in her R2D2 hoodie, carrying her $50 AMC R2D2 popcorn / drink container. And she and I sat in our row like 6 seats apart and just kind of gave each other the like, yes, like we are doing life right, and watched the whole movie and had a great time. She gave a little cheer when R2 first appeared. And it was really fun. On Friday night, I went with my friend Steph and my friend Carl, and the 3 of us, I should say, so my project for these screenings, a very important project, is in my Star Wars collection, I have all 12 of the fast food cups for, they came out at Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and KFC in 1999. And you had to go once a week to each of those restaurants for 4 weeks to collect all 12. And my sister proudly took me to all those, and we got the full collection. So I have been taking a different one every screening. And between myself and my friends, as long as things go according to plan, all 12 will have seen the movie in theaters, because inanimate cups like that kind of treatment. And so we drank from those cups Friday night, and maybe my Watto was full of beer, legitimately purchased at my AMC bar. And then when they introduced Jabba the Hutt, I think all 3 of us, or maybe just Carl and I, because Steph's a little more sane, leaned back and did the la 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 loudly as they said Jabba the Hutt. So it was a really fun time, and I have had a great weekend. I'll push it to Jen first, because Jen, you also took your family, I know, to a screening, right?
I did. So yeah, so PT and I went on Friday up in LA. I'll leave it to him to kind of tell that part of the story. But then I took my family on Saturday afternoon, and we went with my daughter's best friend and her family, and so we had a whole row of just us and our kids. And it was like a 3:30 in the afternoon screening, so I was like, well, like, and there were a bunch of other kids, so I'm like, okay, like I feel safe in terms of like if my kids are talking through the half of this movie, like no one's gonna get mad. And people, it was really sweet because I think like my kids, like all the kids definitely like had to leave and go to the bathroom and like or needed something multiple times, which is when I'm buying movies by myself is never happens. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, can we at least wait till the pod racing's over and then go to the bathroom? like, I think I told my son that at one point. I'm like, this good part's almost over, like, and then we'll go. He was fine, he was good, he was a champ. But my daughter's friend's mom, when the lights came on, turned to the people behind us and was like, thank you so much for your patience, because I think it was like a bunch of 20 somethings, and they were like, no, this added to our experience. Like, we love this, seeing them watch this movie for the first time. They were so adorable. So I'm like, oh, phew, okay, we dodged that bullet. But what was hilarious was like, you know, because my kids are young enough that they don't know that just shouting some random question in the middle of a theater is not appropriate. And so there was one point when the pod race starts, my son sitting next to me just goes, is that Jabba? Because like, we have I have my Jabba, I have a Jabba Funko Pop as like on the dashboard of my car. That's just bobbing everywhere we go. And then during the holidays, we have an inflatable. Well, it just recently died, so RIP, our inflatable Jabba. But
Oh no.
I know it's the end of an era. We've had it for like almost 10 years now. But yeah, for Halloween, and then we stick a Santa hat on him for Christmas. He's like the obnoxious thing that we have in front of our house during the holiday season. And so they're very familiar with Jabba as a character. And so I didn't think that they would be like like excited to see him show up at the pod race. But that was one of those. It was like, and there were a bunch of moments like this, but that was the one where the theater got really quiet, and then my son was like, "Is that Jabba?" And it was just really funny because a bunch of people, and I could hear a bunch of people laughing. So yeah, so in general, it was really fun. I'd say Jar Jar slayed in my screening. Like kids were laughing and they were like, he's funny, like and in particular everything he does in the last battle, people were like the where he gets his foot stuck on the battle droid and then is like shooting accidentally, like being an idiot savant and shooting everything correctly. My son in particular was like eating this up, and he was just like cackling. And so again, it's like really funny to see it through someone whose innocent's eyes. Like, and I do think that the times we got up to have to go to the bathroom were at the end of the second act, beginning of the third act. Basically, once we hit the Senate or we went to Coruscant, kids were like, I don't care about this anymore. They started walking around, right? Like I was like, they're using the backs of the chairs as monkey bars, right? Like, so it was really interesting because I was like, oh yeah, this part of the movie does kind of drag a little bit. Like if you're not like tuned into the politics and the taxation of the drama and like the dialogue heavy part, right? So that's where they kind of checked out. But then they were back in, and my son, once the Darth Maul Duel of the Fates kicked off, he was suddenly like, he'd been kind of like, milling around and stuff. Suddenly was sitting on my lap and just like locked in. And so that was really fun to watch. Like he just like, his eyes did not leave the screen that entire time. So yeah, it was great. But also great was seeing the movie with PT, and also like a much more focused experience. I have to say, because
he also was jumping on his seat.
Right. I also was like, yeah, I get it. The whole planet's one big city. Who cares? Yeah, I mean, it's just it's much less of a story, I guess, as we went to go see the movie, and we had a great time. But it was this was to now my only viewing of this re-release. So I've only gone the one time. I think this is the only time that I can say I had better numbers than Greg. Was in 1999. I saw the Phantom Menace 13 times in the theater, between just sort of, pounding it out that first week, like going, I think 4 or 5 times. And then it like just going to matinees. And then eventually it got to the Salem Dollar Theater and Hollywood Hits in Danvers. And so just being like, what are we doing tonight, guys? Like, why don't we just go see episode 1 again? And so I saw it 13 times then. I saw it once on the 3D re-release. So this made it an even 15. And so part of me is like, do I just want to stay there? Like, this is definitely the movie I've seen the most in a theater. So do I just want to hang at that number? But I might try to go Tuesday or Wednesday to see it again.
I think it'd be healthy to get to 25 because it's the 25th anniversary. So I think you should go 10 times.
But we went to I got to get Jen up to LA as well as Jim, another friend of ours, to experience the Alamo Drafthouse, which doesn't usually have that, and it didn't this time either, the energetic crowds that Greg was experiencing it with. There's a little there's maybe like a little whoop here or there, but it was mostly like, we're here to watch the movie, and sort of, it was more like church. Like we're experiencing this with the sound and the screen. But it had a really fun pre-show, which had a lot of commercials for various toys and tie-in products. as well as the bad lip reading Yoda song, the seagull song, which was incredible to watch on the big screen. And yeah, it was a really good time. Our friend Jim, who I'm assuming will never hear this because I don't think he listens to podcasts at all, let alone our podcast. He's not like a pro prequel. He was like, I saw them all once and I didn't care for them, and has seen them again since because he has children and they've watched it, and he's watched some of the Clone Wars with them, but it's sort of dependent upon, whether they're into it or not. So it kind of comes and goes. So I was a little tuned into like what his reactions were to things. And he seemed to have a good time. But he's also like generally muted and was just like, I was just glad to not be grading papers and hanging out with you guys. so yeah, but it was, it's just really fun. It's just really fun to see on the big screen, and it clicking around in the back of my mind, like reflecting on the differences of like now versus that first time 25 years ago. And, all that has changed and evolved, personally, and also within the universe of this fictional universe of Star Wars.
Yeah, it was really hard for me not to see Darth Maul and then think of the animated Darth Maul. And almost have this be the reverse of, because when we've had animated Star Wars characters that show up in live action, it's sort of like you have a reference point already and you're like, oh, I recognize that and I know everything about that character. It was sort of like that with this, but in the reverse direction, where I was like I now have so much more that I know about Darth Maul as a character and can project that onto the whereas like if you take the appearance of Darth Maul in this movie at face value, he barely has any. We barely learn anything about him or who, like, what his deal is and stuff like that, right? Which I think lends a mystique and has its own benefits and stuff like that, right? But yeah, it was super interesting to think about it from that perspective. I will add for our crowd vibes at the Draft House, they do have a policy where they specifically say they will kick you out if you are disruptive.
Right.
So I think that is mostly why, like, they mostly are talking about, like, if you're caught texting, you get one warning and then you get kicked out and you don't get refunded, which I respected. I was like, wow, this is serious. Like, this is for the serious moviegoers. I like this. But I think that made me less likely to like make noise in general, because I was like, oh, I don't want to disturb anybody, because that's the thing here. But I will just say, like, was lovely to have like loaded fries and popcorn and a drink. Like it was a great, like, just as an overall movie going experience, I would definitely go back to the Alamo Draft House. It was
Talk
great.
about going to church. Amen, sister. That sounds great.
Right? Like I was, yeah, love, and it was delicious, and service was great, and yeah, would 10 out of 10, no notes. I would do it again. But yeah,
did they have?
I was like cracking up a lot. What's that?
I texted this question. Did they have a? Cool
I know.
pint glass
I didn't see any.
Or
they didn't come out with one.
Oh,
yeah, I didn't see anything. They're doing, and I assume this is at all of them. The course the whole year, these time capsule, like for 2 months. So this 2 month span is 1989. So they're showing a bunch of those movies. So all the theme stuff is around that instead of this re-release. So I think it just didn't make the cut. I did see that the Alamo in San Francisco was doing the whole saga, the 9 movie marathon, and Rancho Obi-Wan brought stuff into their thing and set up a little museum display. But sadly, that's up in the Bay Area and not here in Los Angeles.
Road trip. Well, I think we should transition, and I want to give PT first crack at the question of were there things about the film itself? Did you notice things you hadn't seen before seeing it on the big screen? Anything on that list for you?
You mean that I didn't see the first 14 times I saw it on the big screen? This is very small and very dumb, but the first thing that comes to mind with this question is this was the first time I noted that in the opening crawl, it refers to the Congress, which I think is the only time the legislative elected body is called the Congress and not the Senate, which makes me wonder, is there a republic House of Representatives that we just never get to that's even bigger than that has more pods and a bigger chamber somewhere on Coruscant? So that was the main one that like I thought about for like 20 minutes.
That's a Disney Plus
during
series right
the
there.
movie.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, amen.
like Mr. Smith goes to Washington, but with this other galactic.
I was thinking it's more like Veep. It's Star Wars Veep.
Okay, there we go. I like it.
Yeah.
I would watch that.
But yeah, how about you all? Was there anything that you all caught?
You go first, Jen.
So there's a bunch of things, but the biggest one is I was really tracking Natalie Portman's accent in this movie. And I, in general, like I remember back, 1999, I really loved Queen Amidala, the concept of Queen Amidala and the concept of the decoys. I was really into. But this time I was like, wait, like, so once she reveals herself as Padme is Queen Amidala, she is the actual queen. She's still in certain scenes, like when they're running around trying to get to the throne room. She's still using the like queen accent and not the Padme accent. And I don't know why that never would have bothered me before, but this time I was like, oh, that's a weird choice. Like, why is she doing that? I had to think about it. I was like, is there a reason that she would be doing that? You know what I mean? Like, because I think up until that point, it's pretty distinct that she's like speaking as friendly Natalie Portman when she's Padme, and then she's adopting like a big accent when she's queen. And so like, that was interesting that it sort of like bled together and fell apart in the last act.
I was playing a similar game because then I was watching, on the big screen, you can 100% tell very obviously when it's Keira Knightley. And how there's the Amidala voice that, so according to Star Wars lore, the handmaidens and Padme came up with the Amidala character essentially, and they all learned how to do the Amidala voice so that whoever is standing in can be the character. And I don't think Keira Knightley's voice is ever in the film. I think it's always the Natalie Portman processed Amidala voice and never the voice of Keira Knightley. So to the point you were making, in the end, when Keira Knightley runs up to the door and says, "Viceroy, your occupation has ended." I'm pretending like I don't know it, like I'm a normal person. And so then that still is the Natalie Portman voice that is not Keira Knightley.
That's just being dubbed.
And then she and then the other moment of that is in the beginning when it is Keira Knightley, whose character's name is Sabe, for people who don't know. Sabe is being told they should go to Coruscant, and she turns to Natalie Portman and to Padme and says, "Do as all." And Natalie Portman says, "We are brave, Your Highness." And both of those, I think, are Natalie Portman. I think it's Natalie Portman dubbed
talking
over Keira Knightley talking to herself. But it's a really funny game, and it is funny how that has never, I'm going to speak for myself now, has never 100% worked, the whole doubling kind of plot line. It's like, it's a really cool idea. It's just a little confusing the way it's executed. Though the lines where Padme talks back to Qui-Gon absolutely got laughs every time I've seen it. Yes. Like people have clocked it. They know what's going on, and they really like those moments a lot.
A moment related to that, I have more to say about the doubling when we get to the sort of the later critical parts of the outline. But the talkback, I guess, on one moment that did stand out, which isn't the first time, but I hadn't thought of it in a long time, is I think this is an intentional like plant for people as like a little clue that the character of Padme, who's hanging out with Qui-Gon and Anakin and Jar Jar, is actually the queen, is when they're in the pod race is about to start. And, I actually am not remembering the full exchange. So Greg, you can correct me, but it's like the queen would not approve. And then Qui-Gon says something like the queen doesn't have to know, or the queen isn't here. Well, that's the I don't approve. Whatever it is.
When she sits down, she's like, "Well, I don't."
The queen trusts my judgment. That's what you do, and then it's
you
assume too much, which is what the Gungan, without the Nemoidian had said, what Newt Gunray said to the queen about
Mm.
the whole invasion in the beginning. He said it slightly differently. I think if I try to reproduce that, it's a hate crime. So I
Yeah.
won't do that. But you know, that's the like that's an interesting echo. And I know that part of it is just supposed to be, oh, she is that character. She heard that and she's repeating it in a sort of Big Lebowski way almost of you know, you get a line earlier and it enters into your vocabulary, and that's a hint that, you know, this doubling is going on. But it just was so interesting of like, you know, the way that like a character will take in something from even a villainous nemesis can seep into their vocabulary. I don't know.
Mm. Well, so on
Greg,
my
what did you see
list,
this time?
oh, so many things. But some of these are like just little Easter egg things I just enjoy watching for. So just related to Jen's, I had not spotted there are two different times where you see Keira Knightley without the makeup, just as one of the handmaidens, and I hadn't spotted her in those spots before. And again, part of what makes this fun is that she's not Keira Knightley back then; she's some
Right.
stand-in, and
No one
then
knows who
she
she is.
became a big star, which is also Rose Byrne in episode 2, which is just like mind blowing. You're like, that's, oh my God, that's Rose Byrne. So those were kind of fun moments. Also in the handmaiden camp, and here's where I talk back to a podcast nobody's listening to. In the 1999 movie draft, Big Picture host Amanda Dobbins almost takes as her last pick Big Daddy because she thinks maybe Sofia Coppola once said Big Daddy was her favorite movie, and then realizes she said a different movie and says that. And I'm screaming into my AirPods, Sofia Coppola is in episode 1, and you can spot her as one of the handmaidens in a bunch of different scenes. But it's much easier on the big screen. And it had been taken at that point in the draft, but I was like, man, like if only she knew that she missed getting a Sofia Coppola actress appearance. Which those are all incredibly highly regarded. If I understand my Sofia Coppola, yeah, there's not any of those that are controversial in any way.
PT can attest that during the credits, I was like, wait, Sofia Coppola's in this movie? So I didn't know that until this screening this time around.
Nice. Nice.
So that was really fun. And then the second I said it, wait, she was in this movie. Then I was like, oh wait, she must be one of the handmaidens.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's just because Francis Ford Coppola is friends with George Lucas. Like, is that how she ended up in this movie? Okay.
I assume so. Yeah. So then also, I think people have long heard by now that E.T. is in the Senate, and that's always one I enjoy watching for. And I would not say I saw it for the first time, but it's much easier when it's on the big screen. And I spent a lot of those Senate scenes seeing who else is in kind of the side buckets. And I've always heard there's Vulcans somewhere. I've never seen them myself. But I did see... I don't know the species name, but the pod racer Gasgano, the kind of very long four-limbed guy, there's a whole pod full of them I'd never seen before, and I really enjoyed seeing. And then the street vendor, again, I don't know the species, who yells at Jar Jar that they cost 7 whoopee whoopee. There's a whole pod full of them as well. The big screen does not treat the pod racing crowd kindly. Those masks look really bad blown up to full size. They are very clearly like big rubbery, ill-fitting masks. There's a lot of the blue elephant guy who got added to the cantina in the special edition, and a lot of kind of sloppy-looking Biths in that crowd. But the one thing I will say, I had seen this before but forgotten about him. The fake Mace Windu also stood out to me a lot in the last part of the movie, which is when the Jedi Council arrives on Naboo. Samuel L. Jackson was not available for filming that day, and so if you look in the background, the Jedi Council is arriving, and you just see a random black man dressed in robes who doesn't look all that much like Samuel L. Jackson, except for the fact that he's a black man, and so you're like, wait a minute, and recognize him. That scene has, just in case there are people listening who aren't obsessive like us, that has a bunch of my favorite cameos. You can see Rick McCallum, the producer, and Ben Burt in there. And then a shout out to Dan Madsen, who is the the founder, I believe, of the Star Wars fan club, and was really important in the start of the Star Wars celebration. He is the wrangler of the creature Jar Jar is riding on. So he comes out and grabs the reins. And not knowing him probably until about 10 years ago through his reputation, I don't know him personally. It just makes me happy to know that he's in the film and is there as a part of that. So, yeah, I think that's my list.
There was a discussion of fake Windu after our screening, and I had hoped that with your eye on the canon, Greg, you would say that there was some comic book or something that had tried to paste that over with Mace Windu was on a mission, and so they sent like another Jedi master who happened to be black and bald to travel with the Jedi Council, and it wasn't just the producers and George Lucas and Rick McCollum being like, let's get another black guy and throw him in. It's fine. No one will notice.
It's also, I just want to also say it's not Ahmed Best, which some parts of the internet also say. Ahmed Best would be a different black man. And he maybe looks slightly more like Ahmed Best to me than Samuel L. Jackson, but definitely is not him either.
So he must be Lando's dad then.
Yeah.
Like that has to be the answer.
I want to add another thing that I think was a thematic thing that I don't think I've ever thought of, but for some reason really fixated on during this viewing. So in the final battle, when we're intercutting between the scene I alluded to earlier with Jar Jar tripping over the battle droid and then somehow like being amazing, right? And he just keeps like stumbling into doing the right thing during this battle. Intercutting that with Anakin in the starfighter.
I saw it, Craig. I saw it.
Okay.
I was looking.
Oh, okay. Oh no. I was trying to collect my thoughts. I didn't see. But yeah. So we're intercutting to Anakin sort of being like, I don't know how to turn this off, right? And then he ends up taking off in the starfighter. And like, for some reason, watching it this time, I was like, is that trying to say something about connection with and I don't want this to go to the like Darth Jar Jar theory necessarily, but the like connection with the Force and clumsiness or happenstance actually being sort of like a Force sensitive reflex, I guess. Maybe I'm supporting the Darth Jar Jar. I didn't mean to do that when I was making this point, but you know what I mean, like they're because I feel like there's such a parallel there in terms of they're both just kind of like faking their way through, or like, you know, they're like, wait, how is this happening? Oh, I didn't mean to do that, right? And then it somehow saves the day. And the parallel just seems so striking to me that I was like, is that trying to say something? Like, is that? And then it reminded me of this is a really weird reference, but there's one of the recent Doctor Who Christmas special episodes. The whole theme was like bad luck is actually this other sci-fi concept driving the like accidents. Like being accident prone is not just being accident prone. It's like there's a thing that's causing you to be that. And so that sort of made me think of like, is this trying to say that like Anakin's, I don't know, help me.
Well, that makes me think of Qui-Gon's little aphorism lesson that he says to Anakin, which is your focus determines your reality. And I wonder if it's like the intent of wanting to do something good and try to, work in the direction of have a victory for justice and the right side of things. You will get there even if you kind of bumble your way through getting it done. So that's my reaction to that. I don't know if that's textually, authorial intent, or if it's just a textual reading, but I think there's something there.
So when I'm wearing my Wheel of Time hat, that franchise has a concept called Taviran, which is that when you are one of these Taviran, you kind of everything warps around you and you have this kind of larger effect. And it feels very reminiscent of that concept the way you presented it here. Like, yeah, maybe there was an autopilot there, but it's that the events just get warped around somebody so powerful in the Force and so kind of touched by destiny. And you're right that I think we should think more about how Anakin and Jar Jar are kind of paired in the way this film has a lot of symbiotic pairs in kind of very obvious ways, that they spend a lot of the movie together, right? There are the bunch of scenes on Coruscant where the two of them are kind of sitting together in the hall because everybody's ignoring them. But they are very much painted by the same brush, this kind of childlike wonder and kind of, mindset, and this kind of bumbling. And then they end up kind of playing, well, I don't know that the battle turns on Jar Jar at the end, but like the fact that you can kind of bumble and take out a tank and so on, I do think is related to that. And it parallels a lot of other parts of Star Wars. I mean, that's not all that far from some of the Ewok and kind of Wicket's Ewok antics, right, along the way. So it's clearly something that tickles George, even if it isn't deeply thematic.
Yeah, and symbiosis, you could say, and this is again is the thing that I picked up on that 15-year-old me never would have picked up on probably, but symbiosis definitely seems to be a overarching theme of the whole film, where it's the thing that ties what we were just talking about to midichlorians, right? Like of like the idea that the Force really works because midichlorians have the symbiotic relationship with other beings, right? And then we have that really the success, the victory on Naboo is because the people of Naboo and the Gungans recognize their symbiotic relationship to each other and then are able to work together, right? That's seeded very early on with Obi-Wan's comment of like, surely you must understand that like that one thing that happens to you will affect the other. You're in a symbiotic relationship on this planet, right? So like though those pieces like post and like Jen that has analytical skills versus 15-year-old Jen who's just happy to be seeing lightsabers, right? Like that's the thing that I was noticing this time around is like those thematic connections that I never would have.
Well, and it just ties into George's kind of basic definition is light side is your selfless and dark side is your selfish. And so this kind of idea of symbiosis means that to be on the light side, you kind of lean into it. You lean into your connections to others, whereas the Sith push back and sacrifice and are greedy for the one or the two, as PT pointed out.
I was saying that it's also, always two there are with the Sith, that there's the two of them together. You could also go into does the Sith need to sort of exist for the Jedi, and they're also two and symbiotic in some way, and that the prophecy of bringing balance, was that really about like the Sith had to kind of come back to like put the Jedi in check, which is a theory of like trying to explain that what that actually means and what bringing balance could entail, at least across the 6 movies that George was in charge of.
Do we want to talk about Star Wars canon?
Let's just talk like briefly. I think so. I had a very nice encounter with my father-in-law on Saturday, and he said, "What are you doing for Star Wars Day?" And I said, "We're going to see Phantom Menace as a family." And his immediate reaction was like, "Oh, that's the one everybody hates. Like that's the bad Star Wars movie, right?" And just to put it in context, he was in theaters opening night in 1977. He like would call himself a fan of A New Hope and not really anything that follows. And while I respect that mindset, I was thinking how that is the kind of cultural awareness for, I always forget the word, but I think, Jen, you called them normies. Normies who are out there.
Oh, wait. Okay. I gotta defend myself here. So since this bit came about, which if you're listening to us the first time and you're like, why is Jen getting so mad that Greg just used the word normies? It's because I used it in a really episode from a long time ago, and then immediately was like, I apologize for contributing to the toxic discourse around movie fandom by naming other people as normies and us as not normies. I have since heard the phrase normie on like at least a half dozen other podcasts. So it's not just me.
Thank you to everybody on this podcast for listening to our show and taking Jen's turn and using it.
Oh gosh. Okay. Anyway, continue, Greg. Sorry.
I will say that I think the kind of cultural legacy of this film is to say it was a big disappointment and it's terrible. Now, we are talking on Monday, May 6th, when it came out that this was number 2 at the box office this weekend, behind The Fall Guy, which had a slightly less than what was expected opening. I might go so far as to say that could be because people went and saw Phantom Menace this weekend, knowing it was the one weekend they could go see Phantom Menace. That might be a bridge too far. And so I want to just ask both of you, do you think that is this remembered as like the worst Star Wars movie? Is this remembered as the one no one likes? Or do you think it's kind of grown into a different place in Star Wars fandom?
I think we might be getting into the rhetorical situation,
Oh.
Jen, if you want to kick it off.
We're going to move into the rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So all four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We like to have this section of the episode dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. In the teaching of writing, the rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. And I feel like we have a big one for this movie, which is sort of the critical backlash, right? And like because like people were really, as we were talking about, people were really excited when this movie came out. How soon after that, I think I will defer to you two. But like then there was this critical backlash where everyone was saying this was horrible. This is the worst Star Wars movie. What have we done? George Lucas has lost it, right? Like there's all sorts of like crazy criticisms that get associated with this movie and the prequel trilogy as a whole. And now we're kind of coming around the other side of it where people are loving this movie again, right? Greg pointed out to us that Phantom Menace was number 2 at the box office. So clearly there's a love or interest in watching this film. So, well, I think you can come at this from 2 ways. One is from a like fairness perspective of like how fair was the critical backlash either at the time or now, and then how has the passage of time sort of changed the public's perception of this movie and why, right? Like what is the deal with this weird roller coaster of perception that this movie has been on?
So I'm going to try to answer those questions and also Greg's question, but succinctly, so I'm not just talking for 10 minutes. But I think that there's the passage of time element that has helped the movie. Both is both what we were saying earlier about the what's happened afterwards, what's the domino effect of all the other movies that have come out. There is a degree of like, oh, we saw what the Phantom Menace wrought. Are we sure this was actually that bad? Like after we've seen all the sort of lesser versions of this, which, maybe is not necessarily to the movie's credit, but I think there might be a little bit more leeway given to it because it's so weird and so many it clearly is the product of a central creative person who is like, this is the story I want to tell. I'm going to put all my resources into telling this. And in an era where it feels like everything is focus group to death and discussed and hashed out in a committee or a committee, then that's that is sort of like, okay, I like how weird this is. There's of course, which I think we'll talk about more, that the people who are young, who are younger than we were, half and full generation before and beyond, who have just grown up with this movie and grew up loving it and are like, there's a whole bunch of people online who don't understand. They actually don't believe there was a backlash to this movie. They're just like, everyone's always loved this movie. Like, what? And so they have come of age and they are in the discourse. They are sometimes leading the conversation, and especially maybe replaced some of the people who were like, I hated this. And they've done what I think is the right thing. Is I don't like Star Wars, what it's become. I'm just going to, I'm going to think about the old movies that I like. I'm not going to be out there being a part of it. But to Greg's point, or to Greg's question, I think the answer to that depends on, are you in or are you out? And what I mean by that is, are you in the Star Wars community? Is Star Wars something that you engage with? And really, I don't want to say that you can't care about Star Wars if you don't like the prequels, but is this something you sort of actively consider? I think that in that world, 100% this movie has been redeemed. People are like, no, that movie's good. Like, actually, maybe that's the best of the prequels. Like, that's been a shift of folks are like, really, episode 1 might be the best one for lots of various reasons. For lack of a better term, for the normies, I do think it's just sort of like, oh yeah, that one sucked. Like I hated that movie. And everyone doesn't like that movie. And then if they hear that it's actually been like reclaimed, they just think it's empty nostalgia, and it's just like, oh, that's insane because that movie was bad. It made me not like Star Wars, or I didn't go and see episodes 2 and 3, or I went and saw episodes 2 and 3, and those were also bad. Those are the people who they felt spoken to with the first line of The Force Awakens. This will begin to make things right. They were like, yeah, it did. Like, the sequels are so much better. Like, I love all these new ones because they're not bad like the prequels. So yeah, I think it's very complicated because of everything that's come afterwards. But I think there is a divide between people who are really thinking about this and taking in a lot of other Star Wars media and seeing how the story has grown and evolved, and caring about that, which is not like, doesn't make you a better person, doesn't mean that you're doing it right or whatever. But I do think that if you are connected to it and you're really sort of actively being a part of it, it's hard not to have grown some appreciation that may not have been there before for this. Whereas folks that just think of these as blockbuster movies that they catch on TV sometimes and occasionally get re-released into the theaters, they're just like, oh, that one had Jar Jar, that sucked.
I do remember there was a long period, probably when I got to college, right, which would have been a few years later, even though I had that poster on my wall, I definitely had to sort of downplay my excitement for this movie, like, because it wasn't cool anymore to like it, right? And I had to sort of be like especially in discussions with fellow movie nerds, right, to be like, oh yeah, of course there are lots of problems with that movie, right? But actually, like, seeing it this time, this movie is very structurally sound, right? Like, I would actually say that Attack of the Clones, which I also love, there are things about that are like some, like Detective Kenobi. Yes, please give me all day. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I have a soft spot for that movie too. But like, if I'm thinking of it purely from a critical standpoint, the screenplay of that is like kind of weird compared and this one is a very tight 3-act structure that like really like has something exciting in each one. And like, yes, maybe when we get to the Senate, it drags a little bit because there's not as much action, but like it, and like the ending on the lightsaber duel, like it just, to me, I remember being like, wait, there aren't actually that many issues with this movie as a movie, at least in terms of the screenplay. The dialogue is another issue, which I'm sure we'll talk about it soon. But like, you know what I mean? Like, but it just in terms of the storytelling, the structure of the storytelling, I was surprised that I was like, wait, like this is fine. Like,
I to say something that maybe is almost like a Stockholm syndrome type comment. The more that you watch the animated shows, the TV shows, the less it's, I think, bothersome about like, here's just a bunch of terms. Here's just like a quick explanation and backstory of some character or something, which I think for regular moviegoers is just like, what is happening? Like, why are they talking about this? How does this come up? That's where I think the movie feels really weird, and almost, is overwriting what you're saying, Jen, which is it's a clear structure. There's a movie here that could exist on its own and could, doesn't have to be beholden to the original 3 movies in a way that I don't know if episode 2 and 3 can, because those are so trapped in between the Phantom Menace and the original trilogy, that I think this one can exist more on its own, but because it's so esoteric at times with the lore and what they're trying to set up and the information they're trying to get across, which I think we're all really used to because we watch a lot of Star Wars, that it doesn't feel weird or bad. It's almost setting the blueprint for a lot of what happens in the Filoni stuff in the animated world, and then also the Mandoverse. But I do think that people come in and they're like, I don't know what is going on. Like, what is happening? and it feels a lot more complicated than it really is in terms of that core plotting and that core narrative structure.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about Star Wars fandom with my kind of corollary on this question, and I was thinking about how I think if you ask people like, if you just purely took a straw poll within fandom, I think Attack of the Clones loses now as the worst of the prequels, the least liked of the prequels, which I think is fascinating because I certainly remember when episode 2 came out, everybody was like, we're back. Like, we finally nailed it. Like, this is great, which I think was riding high off of, Yoda with a lightsaber and like a grown up Anakin and a reduction of Jar Jar and so on. But I couldn't necessarily say when they switched places, but somewhere in the last probably 10 years or so, they kind of wholeheartedly did. There is a 30 Rock joke where Liz Lemon says something like, oh, and that's when episode 2 came out, which we all agree is the worst of the prequels. And I remember when that joke came out, I was like, what? Like, what did Liz Lemon just say? Like, what did she say? So there's the hate crime. There it is.
hate crime.
Somebody had to commit one.
Oh no.
So I do remember that, and then I I think then the kind of very controversial nature of the sequels kind of means there's a much bigger segment that says no, the Lucas ones are okay. The 3 after that are iffy. And I'm not ascribing to that. I would just say that's what I've seen a lot of. So to me, I would say I would also put episode 9 below this on my personal ranking of Star Wars movies, which maybe we did last year. I don't remember. And I think there are a lot of people who would put episode 8 down there, but they're wrong, but also it's those two halves of the fandom, the people who said no, episode 8 was incredible, and the people who said 9 was the corrective we needed after episode 8. So that's really of interest. I'll just add, I think this movie, it goes without saying in Star Wars, but in case we've had some normies hang out this long, it's just the expectations. Like, you were expecting Return of the Jedi again, and you didn't get that, and you didn't get the next one. So I think that will always be the legacy of the initial reaction to this film. And the fact, as PT alluded to, that the internet was so new, that was back when news editors were like, oh, I can go online and read a message board and turn that into a news story like it's a fact. And so then it became, everybody hates this movie, even though I think it was always kind of a very vocal minority who hated that. I will just say I have no patience for a lot of the criticism anymore. And I think PT's right that it's me more than that. But like, again, when you hear people be like, oh, you like films about the taxation of trade routes, I'm like, that's like barely involved in the film, like, right? Like, it's not actually like the core of the plot. It's a kind of bumpy moment in the crawl. And then the Jar Jar criticism, I think, if you ever take him too seriously, it's like he's for the kids. And as Jen was alluding to, he works really well for the kids and is a great part of this. The number of crimes I saw committed this year in, say, Madam Web or Argyle means I have no patience for any comments against Phantom Menace as being, yes, it's perhaps a weak, good movie, but it is not the worst movie ever created at all. Even this week,
Yeah,
I'm sure.
It's definitely an expectations thing, and I think that if you were old enough to be aware and excited for the movie coming out, you were old enough to possibly be disappointed by it. And I do think that I have correctly been just sort of called a fanboy, because I went in and was just like, I'm just going to like it. Like, I'm just going to like this because I want to see more of what's going on. I don't ascribe to the like anti-Disney era, especially usually quickly morphs into anti-Kathleen Kennedy a stance or mindset of like only the George things matter. But at the time, it did matter to me of like, well, but this is what Lucas is saying. Like, this is what the story is. Like, I wasn't like, I wish the story were X or Y. Like, this is the story. Like, I guess this is what he's been waiting. He was always partitioning off this area. No one could write books about it. No one could do a comic book. No one could make a video game. He was like, I'm going to tell this someday. And he was finally telling it. So I was excited about that, even if it wasn't really what necessarily I was expecting, even if I think there are some things that don't work or didn't work in the context of knowing what you knew going into the movie in 1999, which we can get to. But, I think that is a big part of that initial backlash. I also think like is always true with Star Wars, there's always going to be people who go into a new Star Wars movie and they haven't realize they're old now or they're adults, and they're not going to be able to react to it the same way they did when they saw a Star Wars movie when they were 7 or 8 years old. And they're like, wait, what? And so there's people who now saw the Phantom Menace when they were 7 or 8 years old, and they're like, why can't The Last Jedi be like that? Or why can't Solo be like that? And it's like, sorry, dude, like you're in college now, or you're in your 30s. Like that's just not going to happen. Like it's not going to work out for you that way.
And it is
that
dude,
said,
just to be clear. It is dude.
well, yeah.
Take the bear.
Yeah, mostly because I feel like if they're, most of the women who feel that way are very comfortable just being like, oh, I guess it isn't for me anymore. Goodbye. And then we'll go and watch something else. Whereas,
right. As opposed to like actively antagonizing other people around them about it.
I need everyone to know I'm mad about this. But I do think there are things that I trust George Lucas is a good person, and I trust that his intentions were strong to be like, let's try to get a little more representation to this movie. He really leaned on a bunch of racial stereotypes. And I think it's partly because he's like, I want like tropes that people can glom onto, but having like really thick, stereotypical Asian, specifically Japanese accents on the evil businessmen, the sort of Mediterranean Jewish meets Arabian dealer who only cares about money. The Gungans having that like Caribbean patois. Like I guess I respect the people who don't like Jar Jar because they're like, this is racist, and I feel bad about that. It's like this feels like it's tapping into a step and fetch it tradition of subservient, dumb black characters, and that makes me upset, uncomfortable, whatever. I have no problem with that. I knew someone who was Asian. It still is Asian, but I knew them when the movie came out, and they were just sort of like, "Yo, these characters suck." Like the Nemoidians, like they were like very upset about it, and like I can't be mad. I can't be like, no, you're right. Like that's something to be upset about. I don't think they were done to be to be racist or anything like that, but like I fully understand people who are still upset by that. If you're mad because Jar Jar steps in like poop, it's like, all right, get over it. Like there's like, I maybe I wouldn't have done that. Maybe I would have liked that to not be something that's in this movie, but like, who cares? Like kids laugh, poop's funny, get over it. If you're mad because of some of the accent choices and some of the cultural problems that taps into, I think inadvertently, or at least, absentmindedly, then I think that's fair. And to me, that's why I still keep this one below Attack of the Clones. Like it's tough. Like those are two that I kind of always have jostling towards the bottom part of my Star Wars movie list. Although every once in a while I do think like, why don't I just put those two Lucas movies ahead of some of the lesser Disney era movies? But yeah, anyway, that's the deciding factor for me is like, I get the people who see the problem there, and it may have been because I don't think anyone was around to tell George Lucas like, hey, did you think about this? Like, are you sure? And to his credit, I think that there was some reflection on it, in the later ones to some degree.
This time around, that's the one thing that is still a tough hang for me. Like within seconds of the movie starting, the first line that the Viceroy has, I'm just like, oh right, like this is not good. Like these accents are not good. And it's hard to ignore. I actually would say that the Gungan accent was a little less, like I had remembered it as being worse in terms of the racial stereotype, because I feel like there's enough in there linguistically in terms of like, oh, they're like they're mostly trying to just make their language like just weird sci-fi different. Like there's enough of that mixed in there that I'm like, it's not as bad to me. But obviously I have the bias where like I am of Asian descent, and so obviously that stereotype is going to hit me harder probably. But that this time around, that was kind of, I was like, ooh, like, oh, like, yeah, this is still kind of this is still pretty problematic. But certain things about it were like I had remembered them as being worse. in some ways. Watto still cracks me up. I don't know. Like, it's hard. Like, so yeah, it's hard to acknowledge that, but then also still enjoy the movie. That's hard with anything that in terms of problematic representation, but I'm glad we are at least, acknowledging that that's a thing. But Greg, what were you going to say?
Not nearly as important. I just wanted to really recommend last year, I believe. I don't think it was 2 years ago. TED, the company famous for their talks, put out a podcast called The Redemption of Jar Jar Binks. And it's really good because the creator is essentially interrogating these questions and including kindly but directly confronting the racism question with Ahmed Best himself. And it's really interesting to hear Ahmed speak as a Black man about how essentially, I think PT had it exactly right. Essentially, how he can understand that it's participating in those, though the clear direction from George was Goofy. And it's meaning Goofy, the Disney character. And the creator makes it very clear, like, well, and that's part of the problem because Goofy goes back to this problematic tradition. And so it's a really well done podcast series to kind of walk through the steps of the character's journey, and to hear Ahmed Best reflect on it. Ahmed Best is kind of doing a redemption tour himself now, and I think has come to really own this character and take credit for his role. There was a splashy New York Times article this weekend where he's saying, like, no, I'm very proud of my contributions and so on. And so I think to the point, I do have trouble. I do not sidestep these questions of racism, despite my love of the Phantom Menace. But I always hope that fandom corner makes sure they're clear. They dislike the character, not the performer, because the performer did what he was told to do, as and the same goes with Jake Lloyd. You may not like future Lord of the Sith shouting yippee, but that's what he was told to do, and he's a child, and maybe you should not harass that adult or anybody related to this film at all. So well, and it is hard speaking so I think I've clarified on the podcast before, not only am I just a white guy soaked in privilege, I was from New Hampshire, so to me all these accents were totally new. I was like, what? Like, and I could not have any of those cultural valences on them to understand the insensitivity. And I do think that's something that I've had to responsibly grapple with, despite my love of this film over time, that, like, it is meaningful that these hurt people. And, much like we've revisited characters like Apu on The Simpsons, I think these characters are not above that and beyond this. So it's good that we're discussing that. And
So,
Jen put on the outline favorite problematic accent, and I'm glad we're going to sidestep that question now, because it was hard for me to say what is your favorite of the worst part of this movie. But yeah,
sorry, that was just me like trolling everyone. So yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, we don't have to talk about that one later. Well, I was trying to think of funny ones, because like a lot of podcasts are doing like, what's your favorite character or whatever, and I was like, what kind of fun can we have with these categories? But anyway, all right. So PT had a question on here of, is there anything we would want to go back and change about this movie if we could? He very cleverly put Star Wars fairy discussion. Usually we have an Oscar fairy discussion of like, if you could go back and bargain for a different Oscar winner, but this is like, if you could go back and change this movie, anything you would want to change? I guess the one thing we just talked about, yes, like, let's just say, like,
sure,
yes, we'd all like to make the racial stereotypes less problematic in this movie. But yeah,
yes, for many reasons, not the least of which being, as we were talking about it, I was remembering, bordering on realizing of like, oh, I bet I guess a lot of the people who are like chuds about the new movies, part of the reason they like the prequels is because they're like, it's not woke, because they use all these stereotypes. Like, like now Kathleen Kennedy wouldn't let you use a Japanese businessman accent as the evil thing. Anyway, I'm not going to answer the question yet, but I'm going to buy more time for both of you to think, because this was sprung on you. Just to note that, like, this was like a cottage industry for a while, was like, what's wrong with the prequels and how do we fix it? And that's like Red Letter Media exists, I feel like, because they did that whole Mr. Plinkett talks about all the things wrong with the prequels, and Phantom Menace doesn't have a real protagonist, and all this stuff. And there were just a ton of people saying, here's how you got to move it around. And I, to the cornerstone of the critiques, I feel like, were that it was a mistake to have Anakin be a kid in this movie. That's sort of the Patton Oswalt, like, do you want to go back and see him as a little kid? Like routine where he says he wants to time travel to murder George Lucas to stop the prequels from happening. And that was an issue. There's the whole sort of machete order, which was it still gets brought up, I feel like, in, again, outside of fandom, but in sort of movie fan circles that are not Star Wars fan circles, is the way to experience Star Wars for the first time would be to show someone Star Wars, aka A New Hope, and then The Empire Strikes Back, and then episodes 2 and 3 as like flashbacks, then Return of the Jedi, so you can see the payoff of the Emperor, and you can be like, leave it as a cliffhanger of like, is Vader telling the truth when he says he's his father? But the order is cut out the Phantom Menace. You don't need it. It's unnecessary to the story. It's all just filler. So, again, it was like 10, 15 years of people saying this movie's bad and borderline unnecessary. Obviously, we don't think that anymore, but are there any things that people would want to tweak or change apart from the accidental racism of the characters?
I was gonna say, I just want to lightly push back on the like Anakin should not be a child, because I do agree that in terms of the age difference between Anakin and Padme in this movie, it is uncomfortable if you think too hard about it. But and actually, wait,
are you an angel?
That's the one sound clip I made for this episode. I haven't, and I forgot I had it. So the Anakin Shmi scenes actually hit me really hard because I'm a parent now, in a way that they would not have when I watched this before, right? So I actually think that him being an innocent child, and so very obviously an innocent child, makes his turn to darkness later on that much more devastating and powerful. And so, like, I definitely concede the argument for like, well, he should not have been as much of a child, maybe, but I don't, because there is a big jump between this and Hayden Christensen, right? Like that's more the problem, I think, is like there isn't a gradation. It's like he's a tiny kid and then suddenly he's a brooding teenager. But I do feel like that's an important and I feel like one of you said this on a previous episode, or maybe just in conversation at this point, I don't remember, but that like a lot of people are upset that he's a child because it's uncomfortable to think about that someone as villainous as Darth Vader could have started out as such a pure, innocent, good kid, right? And having kids of my own, right? And thinking about like, are they going to grow up to be serial killers, right? Like, I'm not actually concerned about that, but you know what I mean? Like those types of things that cross your mind as a parent. Like, how do I make sure that they are a good force in this world when they grow up? Right. And so it's actually really uncomfortable and terrifying to think about that this version of Anakin Skywalker, this little kid who like is overconfident and kind of plucky, but like at the end of the day tries to be good and tries to help people. Right. Qui-Gon says he gives without any thought of reward. Right. That's his defining feature in this movie. Right. Because he's just helping them without even thinking about it. And wanting to like risk all this stuff and not make any money off of this pod race. That's the thing that struck me. I'm like, kid, you could be making that money. Like anyway, so that's my response to that. I know it's not actually an answer to your question, but
no, I know. And I like all that. And Greg, I'm sorry, because I know you had an actual answer, but I do want to respond to that, to say, I think this is the time to talk about the problem of expectations in the moment. And we have our usually insignificant age gap. So I don't know where you, the two of you were in your high school life on this, but me as a 19, 20-year-old, as the ramping up to this movie was happening, I was on comingsoon.net. I was on theforce.net. I was just like taking in all the...
Are you an angel?
Thank you. I was just taking in all...
I hit that by accident, I swear. That was not...
That would do. You're
I was
playing
trying
me
to
off.
raise the volume because I was
It's,
like, oh, next time I play this, it was a little quiet last time. I should raise the volume. I didn't realize that I was going to play it. Sorry.
I just take that as like wrap it up, let Greg get to his point. But like there's the things that we knew, and again it was like, oh god, okay, new Star Wars movie, this is amazing. We're gonna see young Darth Vader, we're gonna see young Anakin, and even like knowing the name Anakin Skywalker, that's just like one throwaway line in Return of the Jedi. It's like, yes, okay, like we're gonna learn about Anakin, we're gonna see him. Like there was this expectation of like he was going to be this like I heard Greg mention this on Project Stardust, which is not a conversation we had in this episode. But I heard it like half an hour before we started recording that people thought he'd be Damien. He'd be the Omen. He'd be this evil kid if they're going to cast a little kid. And it's like, oh, and they cast Natalie Portman from The Professional as Luke and Leia's mom. Like that's how it was presented to me. That's how I took it in, is like, oh, okay. So she's gonna marry Anakin and is going to have a kid. Like, great. And so the fact that it was like you're looking at like an 8-year-old talk to someone who is like 16 but pretending they're 13, but like looks like a solid decade apart, and it's like they're sort of flirting, but it's like this is a kid and like a teenager. Like, what is happening? And then like along. Exactly. And then along with that, the whole like, oh, Natalie Portman is the queen, but actually she's the assistant. Is just like, there was no like confusion. It was just like, well, no, that's the queen because it's Natalie Portman's playing the queen. And I know Natalie Portman from another movie, and I know she's Luke and Leia's mom. So like, what are you trying to do? And I think all of that, if you go into the movie without having the casting announcements and without having months of preparation of trying to think about what may happen, I think all that is a little smooth, a little more smooth at least, where you're just like, oh, the third variant on that is like, yeah, the Emperor's name is Palpatine, so the Senator's the Emperor, and the guy in the hood's also the Emperor. It's the same guy, right. Like, so that's that. Like, but like it's played like it's a mystery, and I think even as a lover of the movie at the time, it was like, well, this doesn't make it. This is dumb. Like they're playing us like we're fools. Like, why are they acting like this is going to be a big mystery? Whereas I think if you just come into these movies as a normal person who doesn't pay a lot of attention to this, and maybe you start watching with episode 1 and then watch it unfold, that would be something that is a weird reveal of like, oh, he's actually a bad guy. Oh, that's the same person. And oh, the queen is not always the queen. Like, oh my God, like, I don't know that. I'm not locked into the actress necessarily. So yeah, I think that the Anakin shouldn't have been a kid is partly that people wanted to see more evil more fast from it, and also that like the difference between Jake Lloyd and Natalie Portman felt more stark because of what we knew, or at least what I knew going into it. And so that made it weirder and less like smooth in a way, because it's like, well, I know they're going to end up together. So like but it's strange because he's a little kid. Like, what's happening? So I think that made it easy to overlook all the stuff you were saying, Jen, about like, oh, this innocent person who's just like trying to be a good kid and trying to be a good person. Of course that, it's possible to then become really evil, due to the choices that he makes and the influences other people have on him. And we all could go down that path if we're not careful. So that wasn't clear, I think, when just this movie came out. I think over time that looks like a better choice. Anyway, Greg, what were you going to say?
I actually was going to make the Damien point, so I'm really glad you guys cut me off because I forgot I said that on that other podcast. But I will say, to me, you're also both reminding me of the sequel era, because I think PT is right. JJ was kind of present saying, like, let's pretend the prequels never happened. And right before Last Jedi came out, Ryan said, oh, so the prequels are just a story about how good people can make bad decisions and really ruin everything. What an incredible message to tell kids. And that to me always sums up like the two of them approaching these films and their set of films and so on. So I also the whole time PT was talking, he was making good points, but I was just going, do you see him hitting on the queen, though he's just 9 and she's 14? Yeah, he's probably gonna marry her someday. There, I thought I'd do the whole song myself, so you didn't have to drop in the copyrighted material
I appreciate
for
that.
it. All right. What would I change about this film? I actually said this to Carl in the theater. The thing I would do to change this the most for the to the positive, I would make the Naboo invasion seem more dangerous, because
Yeah.
I think you lose track of the fact that a army of killer robots with guns invades a planet and locks them up. By my reckoning, there's only one shot where you see civilians on Naboo, and it's prior to the parade, and it's as the queen and her group are getting marched off to a camp. You see 2 or 3 other groups getting marched off. And like, if you, instead of some of those cutbacks to just Newt Gunray sitting alone in a throne room, cut back to a group of people in a camp suffering, I think that would really help put a little more stakes on what's going on. It is a kids movie, and I'm not saying like let's recreate, something awful. Like we have a different Liam Neeson Holocaust movie we can watch. But let's show a little bit of kind of that Naboo is actually suffering, because I think Naboo feels so empty when they're gone, and she's meant to be struggling with, should I go back? And then the message comes from C.O. Bibble, you must contact me. You're like, all of this is fake and nothing matters because this planet is empty. But if you could really tell that people, and some ancillary materials have started to fill this in. There's a handmaiden who gets left on the planet, and she gets tortured for information about the queen, and she is actually burned and scarred for life as part of the resistance on Naboo. And like, that's all really awesome. If we could just have had a little taste of that, I think it would have helped the narrative quite a bit.
Woman being tortured is awesome, Craig.
Dang, this is really not going to be a good podcast for me.
We just need to go back and say that again, but in an Nemoidian voice.
There
That's a really good point. I think that's right, because it would really raise the stakes of a lot of the stuff. It's interesting to hear. I don't think that you the two of you are alone on this. That like the movie starts to drag a little bit when it gets to Coruscant. For me, I always was like, Tatooine feels a little adrift at times. Like we're just kind of waiting to get to the pod race. Like I think it narratively all makes sense, and sort of the pieces like all link together well. But that's, again, when I spent a summer going to see this movie all the time, that's when I was the most likely to sort of be wandering in my mind. I also have what at the time was a very unpopular opinion, I think has been slightly vindicated, even though it's a bigger island, but still an island. I think all the political stuff is great and necessary in this movie. Like I love the Senate stuff. I love the talking. The machinations of Palpatine are, I think some of the most inspired choices that George made, which people really hated at the time. The stories. The story that I heard, I don't know. I don't think this is a unpublished thing or whatever. I think this was discussed, but like a story I heard was when he was initially in the room for the sequel trilogy after he had sold to Disney, and there was like a writer's room of Filoni and J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan and Michael Arndt, who was initially writing the screenplay. I think eventually Rian Johnson joined that. There were a few of like other like producers were there. Is they had George in the room with them, and George was like, being like, I can still sort of pitch ideas. Quickly, that got really awkward because it was like, he's like, but this is Star Wars, and I'm the Star Wars guy, and they were like, right, we don't like what you're saying. That one of the big things that, like, especially from JJ, it was like no politics. No one likes the politics, George. Like, you can't do that, which is makes it very clear why the political structures of The Force Awakens make no sense within the context of that movie, and you need a bunch of books and comics to like explain it. So anyway, I do like the politics of it all. I've long felt that the biggest issue with how George Lucas made the prequels is that like 85% of the theme and the plot is very explicitly told to the audience. There's a lot of scenes of characters talking to each other as time goes on, more and more just like in front of a green screen, being like, so this is what I'm thinking. Really, this is what I'm thinking. And what do you think we should do? I think we should do this. Well, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this other thing. And it's all just sort of like, okay, that's fine. That's all very clear. But then there's also like 15% that's like subtext that like I think is easy to get lost. To Greg's point about the two sequel trilogy directors, I have also long had the opinion that some of the backlash against The Last Jedi and against the character choices for Luke Skywalker were Rian Johnson being like, what if Luke Skywalker watched the prequels? Like, what would he think when he found those history texts? Yeah. What would he think about it? And to me, the reaction is like, yeah, like it totally tracks with what's in the prequels. The Jedi kind of sucked. Like the Jedi weren't that great. And I feel like a lot of people who only watch the movies, and especially people who grew up loving the prequels, weren't ready for that and aren't prepared to see it. But I do think it's the intent of the prequels that the Jedi are a calcified institution that have lost their way and don't really know what they're doing and are trapped in their own rituals and procedures and the luxuries they get as part of this republic that is decaying from the inside. So too are they decaying on the inside. And I guess I wish we had a little more time, probably with Yoda and Mace Windu, and a little bit with maybe Qui-Gon being more explicit in talking to them and pushing back, outside of, I kind of don't like following rules and I want to make sure I train this kid, that there was a little bit more about the Jedi and maybe a bit more from Qui-Gon to Obi-Wan or to the council directly about like, yo, there's problems here. Like this isn't actually very good.
Right.
Not maybe like doesn't have to be as on the nose as something like that. But I feel like if there was a little bit more there, then I think that thread would have been clearer for the audience. And I think that would have tied a lot of the themes together across this whole trilogy.
I really love that point. I'll just say, I think that's who Qui-Gon has become slowly through books and comics. And I think you can rightfully say the seeds are there. It said he defies the council. It says he follows the living force. And so it's like, yeah, if we just had gotten a little more of that. So that's a great point.
The other thing I'll add too, because now I actually have answered your question. It's similar. I would go back to those scenes between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and I would infuse more, because I think it's very, very subtle subtext with just how Obi-Wan looks at Qui-Gon when he says like, oh, I don't need to train Obi-Wan anymore. We're good. Like, you know, I mean, he's learned everything he could possibly learn. And then they cut to Ewan McGregor kind of looking at him like, wait, what? Like, I would actually put more in their conversations, put more in the dialogue to establish sort of the way that Qui-Gon being so hung up on Anakin would make Obi-Wan feel as his Padawan, right? Because I think the book Brotherhood does such a good job. Like, there's lots of other things that we've gotten that do such a good job of like taking looking at the psychological perspective of that, of like, oh wait, like how would you feel if your master that you really had a great relationship all of a sudden is like, hey, but this kid is the chosen one, right? And so I feel like, and part of this I'm saying because, you know, I've probably referenced this before, but Dave Filoni's like transcendent monologue tracing what happens in this movie all the way to Darth Vader and Luke at the end of Return of the Jedi, like that, it makes so much sense because of the psychology of like, well, like because Qui-Gon died, right? And then Obi-Wan, who didn't even like the idea of him being dished by his master, right? Was suddenly had to train Anakin, and that really launched all this other stuff. Like to me, just planting more seeds of that, the psychology behind that, or the dynamics at play of that in those scenes between them would have been good.
This
agree.
viewing, it's so awkward how they are fighting on the Coruscant landing platform and then they land on Naboo and are like just making up immediately. Like, so to your point, I think those scenes don't actually work that well without some little additional kind of emotion there as a part of that. And so the unofficial Star Wars prequel trilogy, prequel of books would be Claudia Gray's Master and Apprentice and Mike Chen's Brotherhood. And then people fill in a third. Most people seem to think the Revenge of the Sith novelization. And like that, those books trace that relationship much better, and I think do a wonderful job of showing kind of the potential that again I think is there and is implied, but you know, in hands of good strong writers has kind of blossomed. And I mean, could you have thrown in 20 minutes of that drama into this movie? No, you couldn't have. Like it is so tight and structured, but you could do a little more here and there around the edges.
Everything you just said, Greg, is good, and made me think of a follow-up question. Jen, if you have an answer as well, this is okay, but this feels more like an ion cannon type question. Is there something from the novelization or from what we know about earlier drafts of episode 1, The Phantom Menace, that you wish had stayed in the movie? Because I have a line that I'm thinking of that I'm like, I always wish that was in there. And I'll say what it is. I don't know why I'm leaving it like open. It's when Yoda is like, you know, bestow on you the title of Jedi Knight, the Council does. At the end, it's like, you know, but agree with you taking this boy as your Padawan learner. I do not. And in the movie, Obi-Wan says, like, you know, well, Qui-Gon believed in him. And then it's a Qui-Gon's defiance I sense in you. Like, need that, you do not. But in like, it's in the novel, it's in the printed script, which you could buy, and of course I did. That was out in the bookstore. It's also in when I watched, following Greg's lead, I watched that documentary at the beginning, and they've got footage of Frank Oz like under the stage doing it, and this line is still in the scene when they're filming with Frank Oz. Is Obi-Wan says, Qui-Gon believed in him, and I believed in Qui-Gon. And I feel like that addition like was the like feels to me like that, even if they didn't change anything else, would have felt like Obi-Wan never seemed like he fully like thought Qui-Gon was right about things. And that's him being like, you know what? Now I'm like, he was right. Like I'm with him on that. And I'm taking Qui-Gon's side, not the Council's side. And I feel like that would have tied a lot of that together a little bit more. And I would have really liked that to have been there.
Because that's a commitment driven by loss. Distinctly, right? As opposed to whatever else you might map onto that. All right. So now I think what we'll do is lightning round of all of our favorites. Really quick answers. Right. So favorite character. You want me to go?
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
So
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Mine's Qui-Gon Jinn. PT.
I'm going to say Palpatine. Because I think that he even, especially because I'm so mad about him being in The Rise of Skywalker, that I kind of forget how important and great he is in these earlier movies.
And his like I'm manipulating you voice is so good. It's just
and this Ian McDiarmid is just eating like the whole time in all his different all different capacities in this movie. He's just he has the right level of hamminess and cheese to make just a delicious Palpatine sandwich.
And Carl pointed out, there is the great pan at the end of the film when they said, but who did we kill, the master or the apprentice? And then the camera pans over to Palpatine in silhouette, so you can tell, if you haven't pieced it together. But Carl pointed out to me, I hadn't appreciated, Anakin is standing there, and then Obi-Wan and Padme. So the only thing that stands between Anakin and Palpatine is Obi-Wan and Padme, which is chef's kiss, beautiful, but also
smart.
Agree. I thought we were doing lightning round where we just said it. So I will say Obi-Wan Kenobi, because we needed that kind of energy. And Ewan McGregor, once the ray shields open and the duel goes down to the two of them, that is incredible. And you can expect that from Ray Park because he's a martial artist, but Ewan is killing it with that choreography there.
Okay. One of you needs to explain what this next one is, but favorite glup schitto.
I will. Glup schitto is based on I believe it was a Tumblr post, which was every time a new Star Wars movie or TV show announces, a bunch of people online just go, "Oh my God, Glup schitto is back!" And it was just the celebration of these random, obscure, no-name characters that exist in the background, and you got to be into the lore to know about it. So Yeah, it was favorite glup schitto. Jen, how about you?
So at first, the answer I first thought of is not really a glupshido, more of a creature, but that's kind of on brand for me, so I'm just gonna go with it. The little like chicken lizard things. I tried to figure out what their name. I don't know if they have a name. The ones on the ledge in front of Jabba, and then he like flicks one off the. That still was really upsetting to me this time around. I was like, those guys are not doing anything to you. Why are you so mean? But yeah, they're adorable. And again, like I feel like this movie had like just those little details. That's one of my all-time favorite things about Star Wars is like the little weird creatures and the little like all the background details and stuff like that. So yeah, that's my answer.
My answer, podcasting is not a visual medium, but I'm going to hold up my guy,
Yeah.
Ben Guarneros, my favorite pod racer. He's the guy who never gets started in the race because his pod immediately breaks down. And his combination of like panic, fretting, and rage, it just feels so true to me in my life when something mechanical goes wrong. And he's like fidgeting his fingers as he's panicking, and then he starts slamming the board of his pod racer, and then eventually it blows up. And he's so angry until the other pods start flying by, and he's terrified again because he thinks that he's in danger. And that's it. That's his entire arc. That's his entire character. I would watch a 30 episode cartoon series about him. I would be his best friend. He and I would hang out once a week. He's my favorite dude. Craig?
Oh, well, see, I was worried about this question because a couple categories are covered later, but maybe we'll double dip or we'll just pick secondary characters as well. I am going to say for my favorite, I'm going to go with my heart, even though it's another category. Yariel Poof, a member of the Jedi Council who gets eliminated between episodes 1 and 2 because he looks too much like the Kaminoans, who are featured prominently in episode 2. But he is, for people who don't know, he is the Jedi Master with the incredibly long neck who in these incredible shots of the kind of shot of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan speaking, he's always in the background. And in just about every single one, his head moves. He's leaning back or forth in a way that is really satisfying. So Yariel Poof, my favorite glub shitto.
Doing a terrible job of keeping this a lightning round, but I do want to note that back in the summer of 99, my version of being the 20-year-old behind Jen's family, I was the 20-something, or I was 20 years old, behind a group of kids who were going to see this movie like late July, early August, and they lost their mind at Yariel Poof. They were just like, look at that guy! He's got the longest neck! What is happening? And it was like they were like, as if like the first time they had ever thought to like look in the background of a movie, and they were so excited. And I was there with like my buddy Dan. We went to see this movie like 6 or 7 times, and we were just basking in their innocent joy over Yariel Poof. So he was on my finalist list as well. So great choice, Greg.
All right, next, favorite cringy line of dialogue. Greg, you go first.
Favorite cringy line of dialogue is very tricky because it's like, does that mean I go for the worst one or like the least worst, most offensive one? So the one that is closest to my heart is I, since Star Wars Minute went minute by minute through this film and pointed out that every single thing Rick Ollier says is exposition. My favorite is by far the entire planet is one big city. Which, you know, if you knew Coruscant from, you know, the before times in the books, you knew that was already true, but it's like just so like, why would anybody say this? But okay, sure, you're gonna say this. And it's by far not the worst cringy line from Rick Ollier. It's just the silliest one, and it made me laugh every time I heard it this weekend.
Yeah, I'm with you in that. Like, it's hard to decide where to go in terms of cringy line of dialogue. I do have a couple that might have crossed over into the problematic accent discussion, so I won't. I won't pinpoint those necessarily. Yeah, I'm not going to say all my also rants. I'm going to say just because I think of it all the time. It's kind of tied to what Jen was saying about Natalie Portman's like Padme voice versus Amidala voice, is after she's revealed herself as being the queen and they're planning the final battle. And she's sort of like, we're going to do this, and like, we're going to go in here and then we're going to capture the viceroy and all that. And then it's like, well, but if the viceroy gets away, then we're gonna have, that's gonna be a problem. They're gonna come back with more droids. And she's like, that's why we cannot fail. Everything depends on it. And just like the way that she says it, it's so monotone, but like feels like it's supposed to be so meaningful. It's I really love that one. And now, having said that, I realize there's another one I want to say instead, but it's too late. I already said that one.
Mine probably has to be, and I don't have as much of a problem with the concept of midichlorians as most people do. Like, but Anakin, apropos of nothing, being like, "Hey, Master Qui-Gon, I've been wondering, what are midichlorians?" And then he goes into a long explanation. That's my favorite, because
I and the audience have been wondering, what are midichlorians?
40 minutes later, can you please explain the thing you mentioned in the second act? Right? Like, and just to, like from the screenplay perspective, it's just like is so random and clearly there because someone was like, "Oh wait, we need to actually explain what these things are." That's my pick.
To again, terrible lightning round. To add, I do want to say, like Rick Ollier, I love Captain Panaka, and not just because the actor demanded so much of a raise for episode 2, they just wrote him out, and then in canon made him an evil Imperial stooge, and had him just blow up in a bombing. But the line that I remember back in the day was quoted the most is when they're on Tatooine and the sandstorm is starting and Obi-Wan's out there and he's holding his hand up and he goes, "Oh, this storm's going to slow them down." And there's like too long of a pause, yes, as if he's like on stage waiting for a cue. And then Panaka just goes, "Looks pretty bad." And then like his buzzer rings and he's like, "Oh, thank God. Like my cue." And yeah, the "looks pretty bad" is impeccable, incredibly delivered. What a masterclass.
Also shout out to his. Also shout out to Hugh Quarshie's "More likely they were wiped out," which got a huge laugh at most of my screenings this weekend too. So he's a king.
Amazing. Okay, so favorite Queen Amidala fit.
To stick with my "I love the politics," I'm going with the Senate speech.
Ooh, nice. Okay, Greg.
I think the most underrated is Final Parade. The kind of big, kind of fluffy, like I don't think I've ever seen that outfit at a convention. I've seen most of the others eventually from cosplayers, but I don't think I've seen that. I do just want to shout out the meme that was going around this weekend where somebody pointed out she has, I think it's 12 outfits across Phantom Menace, and Mon Mothma wears the same poncho for 35 years.
Oh,
thank you, Andor.
That's not true in Andor. She's got great fits in Andor.
Yeah. Yes. Andor redeems it, but after that, she finds that one outfit she likes and sticks with it.
I gotta go classic. So first of all, 15-year-old me would have picked what Greg picked. I remember being like, "Oh, that's so pretty. I want that." But I gotta go with the iconic red and gold robe with the crazy hair. I mean, it's just like all the hairstyles in this are insane. But yeah. All right. Favorite pod racer. PT doesn't have to answer this because he already gave his soliloquy about Ben Cordernos. But Greg, do you have a favorite pod racer?
No, I think we make PT pick a runner-up. What's your number 2?
Oh, okay.
It's Odie Mandrell. Because I think I just really like pod racers who fail. Don't act like I didn't have a list 4 or 5 deep for each of these, just to make sure, because I don't know who's going to take what. But it's Odie Mandrell. He's got the Three Stooges pit droids, and he speaks sort of in Spanish. And again, he just goes, "Oh no," because it screws up. I really empathize with pod racers who have machines that just fail.
I like his quasi-Spanish when he tosses in "y tu mama" makes me laugh a lot. Like, and your mother, and your mother. Jen, you go second because I want to go through my list of 5 candidates. So I'll let you.
Jeez, I'm gonna pick Sebulba actually because I think his character creation I remember was just like mesmerizing to me as a 15-year-old. It was like, how does he walk? Like his hands and his feet, like what is happening? And he's just a really fun bad guy to root for, you know, or not root for, but root against is what I mean. He's a fun bad guy to root against, where it's like he's just kind of a jerk and seems really full of himself. He's used to winning, and so you're like, yeah, that guy. We want Anakin to win.
And so great. I said this on podcast Stardust. So great that it's not a guy in a suit. Like they really broke this. Like this is something we could not have done before. All right. Top 3. Dudbolt, because he's a puppet, right? He's in only a couple of shots, but he's an actual puppet, not a CG creation. And I think a lot of people miss this. Teamto Pagalies, who gets shot down by the Tuskens on the Canyon Dune turn and does a crazy little spinny thing. But number 1, and the king of the deleted scenes, Rats Tyrell, who has a whole family, including a newborn child, who are featured in part of the pod race that has been deleted and not put back in. Then they are in the background. You can see them from the moment Qui-Gon enters into Mos Espa. They're in the background, kind of arriving as tourists. And eventually that whole plot line leads to them crying in the background. His family is crying in the hallway, passing by the door as Watto and Qui-Gon, because Rats Tyrell blew up in the cave. And then I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure you see pit droids carrying his body on a stretcher in the podcast tent at the next scene after that. So clearly a lot of fun. He's a little blue guy for people who don't know, but he's a great one.
Wow, nice. Favorite Jedi Council member? We'll have Greg go first because you picked Poof earlier.
So Poof is also one from the High Republic, and so I'm going to note that Oppo Rancisis, who is the snake-like one with the giant beard, I'm going to give him my spot for this question, who, again, has been on the High Jedi Council from the time of the High Republic to the present day. So could Oppo Rancisis and Yariel Poof be in the Acolyte? Only time will tell.
I mean, no wonder the Jedi suck. Just a gerontocracy of these people who've been there forever. We need Jedi term limits, folks. I'm going with Yaddle. I love Yaddle.
Nice.
And especially because it's the first time there was ever a possibility there was more Yoda than Yoda, like more of that species, which was always just sort of like maybe Yoda's a unique creature. It really opened the door for Grogu in the future.
Mine is probably, this is not like a fun answer, but Depa Billaba, because when I saw it this time, I was like, wait a minute, like, where's Caleb Dune? And then actually, this is a legitimate question. Like, in the timeline, have they not met yet? And that's why he's not there? Or is just like, there's just no Padawans allowed, and that's why he's not there? Like, what's your canon explanation?
I believe they have not met yet. So as we record this, last month in April, they came out with a novel called The Living Force, which is a story of the 12 members of the Jedi Council going to a planet together, having been challenged by Qui-Gon Jinn. Whoops, I said you're being challenged by Jen on AOL Instant Messenger to get out and be amongst the people and leave their ivory tower. They go to a planet and engage with them all. So in that novel, which is about a year before Phantom Menace, she is just barely kind of a master and is in the ranks and doing missions. So I would say, especially given his age at Order 66, I don't think he can be more than 13. So I think they haven't met yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I also would assume no Padawans in the council chambers for the council members.
Well, there are scenes where she's just standing around with a bunch of them. Like, they're not necessarily in session. I can't remember.
Just talking to fake Windu. Being like, hey, how's your decoy work?
All right. Favorite scene. It's hard not to just pick the whole Duel of the Fates fight, but maybe I'll be more specific and say, and I already told this to PT off mic, but like, the suspense device of the like little red shield walls that pop up, that to me still hit as hard as it did in 1999, where I was like, no, Obi-Wan, you're not gonna make it in time. I was still just as stressed out about it, and I said, like, it's just that's one of the key pieces of that scene that I think makes it so successful.
Had either of you been spoiled by the soundtrack?
I had.
Okay. Jen,
You
were
mean
you
like
aware of
listen
this?
to it beforehand?
No. So
The
one of the tracks on the soundtrack, which came out 2 weeks before the movie, was Qui-Gon's Noble End.
Oh,
And so I intentionally didn't look at the CD or anything about it online because I was worried something like that would happen. I heard a DJ on the radio say they didn't say who it was, but they said there's a track on the CD and the title reveals the death of one of the characters. And I heard that and I was like, well, the only character who could die is Liam Neeson because everyone else I know they survive. So it's got to be Liam Neeson. And so we got to that point in the movie the first time I saw it, and those doors closed, and I was like, oh, this is it.
he's done.
Like, no doubt. The soundtrack, it got me. John Williams.
That's weird. Now I can't remember. I feel like because I was a big buy the soundtrack before the movie comes out kid. Like with every Disney movie, like I would do that. So I feel like I must have done that with this, but I also don't remember it being spoiled. So
maybe it speaks to the fact that, like you said, you weren't that as much into Star Wars until you saw this movie. So maybe it wasn't one you were prepped for like that. Greg, favorite scene?
I'm going to go with the opening hallway fight because that was, to me, and I still remember the feeling that first screening in 99, like, this is it. This is what we always thought it could be. And it's hard now in the context of Star Wars to remember we hadn't seen two Jedi together ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like from that moment, it's like they're fighting and they're into it. Like it was so amazing. Even if they use a force ability that would be really handy for Obi-Wan later in the movie at a moment Jen may have just described, and it makes no sense. But the force pushing, like it was a little in the trailer, but like to see all that come together, that was like, that just like, yes, it's in my veins and we're back, baby. We're so back.
I feel like it's boring if I just say the vote of no confidence scene in the Senate because I've already shouted it out so many times. So I'm going to go with the Gungan versus battle droids part of the final battle. And just the setup of it, not necessarily the battle, but the setup of all the Gungans marching out of the mist, setting up the big shield, the ships coming over the ridge, and then firing and finally being like, all right, we got to put the droids out. And those... the sequence of the droids being put into place and being deployed, just incredible stuff. And I was like, this is insane, out of control. And again, not quite to the level of a Sebulba, but sort of like, I don't think, how could this have ever happened? Like, how could they do this if they didn't have the technology they had at this point? I don't know if there's a practical way to get all of those machinery parts moving and standing up and reacting the way the droids do. Just great. Just really good stuff.
Avengers Endgame totally ripped off their force bubble, their shield.
Mm-hmm.
All right. No. Favorite shot? I put a question mark because I'm like, I don't know if we can isolate a specific shot, but
I could.
Okay, go for it.
I had a ton. Well, I kind of want to go last though because I have a bunch. For things that haven't been touched on at all, I am going to say the reveal of Otto Gunga when they're swimming underwater and it's like behind Jar Jar and he's like, again, coming over sort of like an underwater cliff and just all these pods and this underwater city reveals itself. I got goosebumps on Friday. I got goosebumps every time I see it. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. Like it just looks so good. And whatever sins there are of Jar Jar and the Gungans, that moment is worth it for me because it just looks incredible.
What is it they use on 24 Minutes of A24? That's cinema, baby. I feel like that's Star Wars, baby, because it's just so perfect. And I know a lot of my friend Carl is one of these people. It's like that sums up what this movie is. It's about wonder and it's about like this whole new imaginative world right there. So, I was going to say, I already spoiled my own joke, which was like the shot of the vent, which is all practical effects and no, but I think I'll take, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon in between the council sessions. I believe Anakin's being tested upstairs. I say I believe just so I seem normal. And they walk out as they're kind of debating what's going to happen. And there's a big Coruscant sunset. The sun is way too big. It's like the planet should be frying up. But you see the space lane traffic, and it's like, that to me is like the prequels. It's like two Jedi, someplace they really shouldn't be, but it's still somehow beautiful. And, you know, the Revenge of the Sith will play a lot with the sun on Coruscant and what time of day it is on Coruscant. But it is, to me, this means, like it does in that movie, kind of the twilight of the Republic and the end of this golden era coming to pass.
Amazing. For me, it's got to be one of the shots of Darth Maul, probably Darth Maul on Tatooine. I feel like, and especially like the wider shots of him and Qui-Gon going at it, like when Obi-Wan's like getting closer, like fly low or whatever it is, right? Like I just feel like those always looked really good to me.
When you see the two of them through the ship's like window, like in almost like a little corner of it, I always liked that. I thought that looked really cool. Yeah. Sense of scale.
I feel like we haven't talked about Darth Maul nearly enough on this 2.5 hour now episode.
I mean, it's true. I feel like basically anytime Darth Maul's on screen is a candidate for best shot because he's so cool looking. And when the door opens and he's standing there, when he takes his hood off, when he ignites the second blade, when he starts flipping, and the one thing where they enter from the hangar into the, I think it's like the power room is what it's called. When he like the shot begins with him doing like a little like flip, like a spin flip, and then he like points at a piece of debris on the ground and like throws it back with the force to open the door, and then is spinning his saber, and then the two Jedi come in from the side of the screen. What a great movie. Fight the haters, to use an Andor level edit.
I loved in most of my screenings, he got a huge cheer when the door opens. And I think people thought that's when he ignited the lightsaber, because then he ignites the lightsaber and there's like a secondary lesser cheer. But like, I think both moments are iconic, as PT just said, because people just couldn't remember when it came. The door opening does have the start of Duel of the Fates too, which is also worth cheering, right? The like, bum, bum.
Yeah, amazing. We always have one eye on the Oscar race. And actually, I was pleasantly surprised when I looked up that this movie did actually get 3 Oscar nominations. So there were 2 for the sound, the 2 different sound categories, and then 1 for VFX, which, I mean, once I saw that, I was like, oh, that makes sense. But I think I just assumed it didn't get anything. But my question to both of you is, if you could go back and give this film 1 Oscar, what would it be for? And I guess maybe 1 Oscar it wasn't already nominated for. Maybe that makes it more fun.
Go ahead. There's an obvious one. Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're probably both going to say, or maybe I'm assuming too much, it's John Williams. How did John Williams not get nominated for this? And those iconic, I mean, Duel of the Fates is an incredible song and an incredible composition, and is so different than previous Star Wars. The fact that he was nominated this year for Angela's Ashes, I don't even know what that is. And then didn't get even a nomination for this film is just absurd to me. So I give him the Oscar for it.
For those who don't recall, Angela's Ashes was like a classic, this had Oscar buzz, like asterisk movie of like, because it got a John Williams nomination, it can't be covered on that podcast. But it was this memoir that everybody bought in like 1997 about growing up poor in, I think in New York, but being an Irish immigrant and growing up poor. And they were like, they're going to make a movie. It's going to be so good. And then the movie came out. Everyone was like, no, this sucks. We don't like it. And so it just like flopped and people were not interested in this telling of it. But that's the movie that had enough respect to get John Williams a nomination. I do feel bad for John Corigliano, who got his second Oscar nomination and his only win that year for a movie called The Red Violin, which I've never heard of, but it sounds like the music is very important. It's like following the trajectory over hundreds of years of one violin. And it feels like the music would be an integral part of that story. So that sounds like a pretty good win. I feel bad taking it away from him, but I clearly would very easily and with almost no remorse. To speak to what Jen was saying, it did get 3 Oscar nominations. It lost all 3 of those to The Matrix, which is something else we like haven't discussed, but was the real contrast to this movie. That movie came out like 3 weeks, I think, before episode 1. And that was the cool movie that everyone was like, why wasn't the Star Wars prequel? Why wasn't the new Star Wars movie cool like The Matrix with like leather dusters and guns and like weird slow-mo effects? Like that's the what people had longed for. So it's hard to be mad that it lost any of those categories to The Matrix. That is a great movie. It has amazing effects. I do kind of think it should have, episode 1 maybe still should have won visual effects. I would say, you know, is it possible that it could have won like art direction? Was it called? Yeah, it was called art direction at the time, which went to Sleepy Hollow. Also a very worthy win, but like, all those sets, now that we like lament that we don't have those sets in Star Wars, like, wouldn't that have been great? But I'm going to zag, and I'm going to say for mine, this would never have happened, and maybe it still shouldn't have, but just because the person who won this is a terrible person. Liam Neeson, Best Actor, instead of Kevin Spacey for American Beauty. Liam Neeson holds it together. Let's make it happen. Why not?
You took mine. So I was actually going to say...
Sorry, Jen.
I was gonna say Liam Neeson in supporting actor because I feel like that would be what the Oscars would do.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? They would like they would somehow not acknowledge that he's the main character of this, or you know what I mean? Like it would be a weird category thing. Because I do agree that like I think he is largely responsible for holding this whole movie together, especially in terms of the tone. I feel like he's the one actor that really understood the movie he was in. And his performance reflects that, and like he just has so much gravitas. He sells everything the best. Like the fact that he had to give that monologue about what midichlorians are, and I was just like, yes, tell me more. Like, is amazing. So yeah, that I mean, I guess I'll go co-sign instead of scrambling for another choice. I'm just gonna co-sign what you said.
Does this start him on a trajectory to a terrible career, though, is kind of what I always grapple with. I mean, obviously Taken is the first of the action star Liam Neeson, but now that he comes out with like 5 of those a year, I'm like, is it possible that the poor reception of Phantom Menace started him down that path?
I feel bad like getting into this here at the end of an otherwise joyous episode. It was his wife dying. His wife died in a skiing accident.
Oh, that's right.
And he was immediately like, he was sad. And then he was offered like, do you want to play an action hero in a movie where you're just really angry all the time? And he was like, yes. And it was super successful. And he just has been rolling with that ever since.
All right.
So fair. Phantom Menace innocent once again. But I will say, like, there's no chance like that. I mean, obviously no acting nominations would have happened because everyone's like, this is terrible. But people were like, Liam Neeson's bad at this. Everyone's bad in this. Like that was part of the response was like, well, why? Like he's so good in all these other movies. Like, why is he bad? Why is Ewan McGregor so stiff when he was so good in Trainspotting? You know, Natalie Portman seemed like such a precocious star, and she's doing this weird monotone. So that is definitely rose-colored glasses looking back on this, or looking at it on its level. There's no way this would have won any above the line Academy Award nomination.
Well, I will just say, Oscar Fairy rules. I would in a heartbeat trade in Liam Neeson as a nominee. It is tempting because the winner's so problematic, even though that's an expensive double cost swap. But 1999 is not a bad year for Oscar Fairy episode either, just as we're looking forward. There's a lot of Cider House rules here. Cider House rules is the American Hustle of 1999.
Oh.
This is one where I have to pull an Antonio. I'd have to save up points for like a couple of years to get to how many changes I want to make in 1999.
Amazing. Well, thank you both. It was so amazing and fun celebrating this movie in its 25th year with both of you. I cannot think of any two people that I would have rather have done that with. So, Greg, where can folks find all the other Star Wars work and other work that you're doing out in the world?
Let's see. Coming up shortly, I will be covering the Tales of the Empire television show for 2 special episodes of the Rebel-based card, Breakfast, who knows what we'll call it. And then on June 5th, we begin Acolyte and Fluffy Breakfast coverage of the new Acolyte television show. If people are on the fence somehow 2.5 hours later and haven't been to see Phantom Menace in the theater, the Acolyte special preview is incredible, and we're in for a real treat, which will finally merge The Matrix and Star Wars by bringing Carrie-Anne Moss doing some really cool Jedi Kung Fu into the Star Wars universe. So people should check out Acolyte. So yes, on the Rebel base card feed, I'm there. Also see me on Letterboxd, lagging just behind PT, but The Phantom Menace was my 200th movie of the year by design. Onward, we'll see if we can get to 25 viewings of The Phantom Menace in the 25th year of its existence.
I was going to say it was your 150th as well, and nothing in between.
For the Acolyte trailer, I'm just going to say, PT can attest to this because I was sitting next to him. There was a one moment where I said, "Oh my gosh, yes." So I won't spoil what that is, but yeah, I was very excited to watch that. And PT, where can folks find you and follow the show?
Well, they can find me on Letterboxd at PT McNiff, and you can see all the time that I waste watching things. I'm finally watching the second season of Visions, Star Wars Visions, which I realized or /found are individually listed. So my Letterboxd feed is going to be filled with Star Wars short films for the next little bit. So you can find me there. You can find the show on Letterboxd as well at LTR Pod. You can also follow the show once again on Instagram or Threads at The Long Take Review. And you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Wherever you are listening now, you can just hit subscribe and follow us for new episodes.
Amazing.
After you hit like and give us a review.
Of course.
It's conditional.
Yep.
All right. And you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen, though I am sparse compared to these two because I'm too busy editing our 2.5-hour episodes, so I don't get to watch as many movies. And you can find me at Sobchakchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI on Instagram and Threads. May the Force be with you.
And also with you.
Yay. Yippee.
Way to make that Catholic. That's good. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.